Right, you're watching First Move. I'm Eleni Jokos in Dubai. Great to have you with us. And we begin with important new economic numbers out of the United States. The US has just released its latest look at the state of the American jobs market. It's a crucial piece of information for economists looking for signs of slowing growth as the Fed begins hiking rates. Now, 390,000 jobs were added last month, a bit higher than anticipated. The numbers show that the US jobs market remains very healthy, but there are signs that jobs growth is beginning to ease a bit. Meanwhile, US unemployment rate held steady at 3.6%. US futures have been trending lower all morning, and Wall Street futures are still pointing to a lower open as well. As you can see, the Dow Jones slated to open down 0.7%. S&P also down 1% right now. These are the futures. Rahul Solomon joins me now. Rahul, let's break this down. I just had a quick look over these numbers. Much better than anticipated. You have a very steady unemployment rate at 3.6%, and I have to say notable gains in some of those sectors, and it's still within hospitality and leisure. I guess the question is, what is going to happen in the future? But before we get into the future, let's talk about what you've picked up in the latest reports.
Yeah, let's talk about the now, Eleni. You just talked about futures saying that they were lower, and we were watching them as these numbers cross, and they pretty much stayed the same. So no big surprises here, I think, is the headline. When we look at the numbers, about 390,000 jobs added. And to put that in context, Eleni, for the last 12 months, the number started with a 4. It began with a 4. So for at least 12 months, we have seen more than about 400,000 jobs added. So it's still a strong number, but it could be going in the right direction in terms of what the Fed wants to see, in terms of what the White House here wants to see. Of course, we got that op-ed from President Biden earlier this week talking about the fact that we could see slowing job growth. Of course, the idea and the priority for both the Federal Reserve and the White House is that they want to lower inflation, and so they want to see sort of a little bit more balance in terms of the jobs market. But yeah, let's go through today's report. So the unemployment rate pretty much staying 3.6%. That's about the third month in a row we're seeing that. Employment in leisure and hospitality, as you mentioned, Eleni, that increased by about 84,000 in May. Employment in professional and business services rose by about 75,000 in May. So again, still a very strong jobs market, but I think the devil is in the details, as they say. It could be going in the right direction in terms of cooling sort of the demand for workers right now. We have heard Fed Chairman Powell talk about how there are practically 2 open jobs right now for every 1 person looking for a job, and how that could be perhaps inflating wages. And so they want to see some more equilibrium in the jobs market, and this could be one indication that it's beginning to happen.
Yeah, really fascinating, right? And this is as we're anticipating a recession, and we're hearing warning bells and, very big concerns about what the inflationary outlook is going to do to the economy. So time will only tell. But I have to say, we really do care how Elon Musk feels. And he's weighing in on the state of the economy, and he says this doesn't feel good. Tell me what he said, and whether we should be paying attention to his statement.
Yeah, it does feel like anytime Elon Musk speaks, it gets quite a bit of attention, but even more so this week, Eleni, because of the perspective and the context in which it comes. So Elon Musk, this according to Reuters, putting out a statement to employees at Tesla that he has a super bad feeling about the economy and that he wants to cut about 10% of jobs at the electric car maker. Eleni, I have to point out, in mid-April during earnings for Tesla, we heard him talk about record profitability and the demand for the product. So this is not necessarily a reflection of profitability or demand, but it does make you scratch your head if a short time ago Elon Musk was talking about how they were able to pass on increases to consumers because demand was so strong and record profitability. And now we're hearing him say that he has a super bad feeling about the economy. Of course, these comments coming just a few days after you and I spoke about Jamie Dimon sort of updating his forecast and calling for perhaps an economic hurricane warning, saying brace yourself, and that he doesn't know if what we might experience in the U.S. economy and perhaps even globally is going to be a smaller hurricane or something more along the lines of Superstorm Sandy. So the warnings appear to be growing louder and coming from quite prominent people in the business world. And the clouds appear to be getting darker, Eleni.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've got inflation, that's a big risk. You've got higher oil prices, and you've got the Fed hiking rates. It's an interesting combination, Rahel. I'm sure you and I are going to have a lot of these conversations.
It is, and we will.
Yeah.
But Eleni, I should say that the asterisk to Jamie Dimon's comments were that the strong part of the economy was the jobs, was the labor market, and we're seeing that today as well.
Yeah. Interesting times. Rahel Solomon, always good to see you. Thank you so much. Now, as President Biden says, inflation is his top economic priority. He's now planning to meet with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman later this month. This comes after OPEC and its allies decided yesterday to increase oil production by 200,000 barrels per day in July and in August. The White House praises Saudi Arabia's role in the decision, hailing it as a diplomatic breakthrough. Now, today marks 100 days of the war in Ukraine. The country's military says it's now pushing back Russian assaults in some areas in eastern Ukraine as heavy fighting continues in the region. Ukrainian forces also claiming they have made progress during counter-attacks in the southern region on Kherson. Matthew Chance is in Kyiv with more.
Well, it has been 100 days now since Russia launched this attack on Ukraine. I think the fact that it's lasted for so long and that Ukraine has not folded in the face of this Russian assault has surprised many, not least in Moscow. But of course, the price has been high. Ukrainian officials say about 20% of the country has fallen under Russian control, an area the size of Luxembourg, the Netherlands and Belgium put together. The death toll has been catastrophic too. There are no exact figures, but when you combine civilians and soldiers on both sides, it's estimated tens of thousands of people have died. And in some of the most appalling scenes witnessed in Europe for a generation, innocent civilians seem to have been targeted in alleged war crimes, something that's going to keep prosecutors busy potentially for years to come. Fleeing the violence, millions of people have been forced to escape their homes. Ukrainian officials say the fighting has displaced 12 million. 5 million have left the country altogether, either to Europe or to Russia, to where Ukrainian officials say people are being forcibly evacuated. At the moment, the military focus has shifted to the Donbass region of eastern Ukraine, where Russian forces and their proxies are battling for control of Severodonetsk, taking more than 80% of that city. But elsewhere in the east, Ukrainian troops say they're making counterattacks to recapture territory with the help of sophisticated weaponry being supplied by the United States and other Western countries. Ukrainian officials are pleading for even more of that military support to allow them to continue to defend their country for another 100 days and, if necessary, beyond. Matthew Chance, CNN, Kyiv.
Meanwhile, in Russia, the head of the African Union meeting with President Vladimir Putin to ask him to lift the blockade of grain and fertilizer stocks from Ukraine. This as Africa faces a food crisis caused by the war in Ukraine. David McKenzie now joins me from Johannesburg. David, good to see you. Here's also the reality. A lot of African leaders have not voted to condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So I guess the question is, do you think we'll see a breakthrough in this meeting?
I'm not so sure if we'll see one in the short term, but you can expect, Eleni, that the Russian president will try to shift blame away from his own actions in terms of blockading Odessa and other ports to stop millions and millions of tons of grain from leaving Ukraine to go into export to around the world, including countries in Africa. And yes, there are certain countries in the continent that are facing a food crisis. And this is a cascading effect that could only get worse if this conflict drags out. First, we believe the prices will continue to increase on top of inflationary pressure. And then you could see a scenario that you'll even have a lack of food for distribution, both for export and for the aid groups. The World Food Programme head called the blockade a declaration of war on global food security just this week. Eleni?
Yeah, and David, very quickly, could you give me a sense of the pricing on the continent, how it's going to affect in real time some African countries?
Well, there, as you know, more than 50 African countries all have different impacts from this conflict. I think the early Impacts will be seen in the North Africa region, also parts of the Middle East and Asia, Central Asia particularly, because they have such a great dependency on Ukrainian and Russian grain and oil, sunflower oil that is. You'll also see an ongoing effect because of fertilizer. Russia is one of the biggest producers of fertilizer, critical for global agriculture. Just this week, the head of the African Union was complaining that the impact of the restrictions on the SWIFT banking system has constrained African countries in particular from purchasing key agricultural products. There is this chink in the armor now in terms of global solidarity with Ukraine because of the impacts, I think, that individual countries, particularly here in Africa, will be feeling in the months ahead. Eleni?
David, it's such a good point. The inflationary impact is going to be big. David Mackenzie in Johannesburg, thank you. Now, these are the stories making headlines around the world. Some breaking news from Germany. At least 3 people have been killed and more injured after a train derailed in the south of the country. Local police say the train was traveling towards Munich, and we'll keep you updated as we get more details on that story. Right, so US President Joe Biden made an emotional appeal to lawmakers last night, pressing Congress to pass gun control laws. His speech followed a string of horrific mass shootings. He said too many everyday places in America have become killing fields. The Gun Violence Archive reports that there have been 233 mass shootings in the US since the start of this year. Now, police in Hong Kong are warning people not to hold public commemorations of the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre. Activists have been organizing vigils almost every year on the 4th of June, but authorities have recently banned the gatherings, citing COVID concerns. Police will do the same this year and are threatening 5-year prison terms for what they call illegal assemblies. Beginning June 8th, unvaccinated travelers flying into South Korea will no longer need to quarantine. Seoul's Incheon International Airport will return to 24-hour operation for the first time since April 2020. COVID testing will still be required prior to a visit and again within 3 days of arrival. It's a game of geopolitical chess in the South Pacific, and China just came up short in the latest round. This week, Beijing failed to get what it wanted in its sweeping attempt to extend its influence in the region. The US and Australia are now racing to outplay China and make sure the strategic region stays out of its orbit. Ivan Watson has the details in this report.
To many outsiders, island nations in the South Pacific are a tropical paradise, exotic and remote, and yet the focus of intense diplomatic activity from China, part of a Chinese push for influence that's turning the blue Pacific continent into a zone of geopolitical competition between China and its Western rivals. China's foreign minister has been leading a delegation on a whirlwind 10-day tour across the South Pacific, meeting face-to-face or virtually with officials from at least 11 different Pacific Island nations. Most of these countries' entire populations are dwarfed by even a small Chinese city.
Don't be too anxious, don't be too nervous, because the common development of the prosperity of China and all other developing countries would only mean greater harmony, greater justice, and greater prosperity of the whole world.
The last time great powers competed in the South Pacific was World War II, when the U.S. and its allies fought a grinding, island-hopping military campaign against Japan. Since the war, many Pacific islands still have close ties to the U.S. and its Western allies. But in March, that status quo shaken with the leak of a secret security agreement between China and the Solomon Islands, signed the following month. It allows the Solomons government to call for help from Chinese police and armed forces. In May, the release of another proposed document, the Chinese Pacific Island country's Common Development Vision, a sweeping vision slammed by the president of the Federated States of Micronesia. In this letter, he accuses China of offering attractive economic assistance as part of a bid to take control of security, communications infrastructure, and fisheries in the islands. Just days after being sworn into her new job, Australia's foreign minister rushed to shore up Western support for the region.
And Australia will be a partner that doesn't come with strings attached, nor imposing unsustainable financial burdens. We're a partner that won't erode Pacific priorities or Pacific institutions.
During his visits, China's foreign minister refused to take questions from independent journalists,
that no questions will be asked at this press conference,
prompting a boycott from reporters in the Solomon Islands, like Dorothy Wickham.
And we wanted our government to remember that we were a democratic society. I mean, they are in parliament, voted in democratically by the people. And if they were to go around signing agreements with foreign powers, then at least our people should be informed.
Meanwhile, the Prime Minister of Fiji has a warning.
Geopolitical point scoring means less than little to anyone whose community is slipping beneath the rising seas, whose job has been lost to a pandemic.
On Monday, Chinese diplomats backtracked, offering a softened vision of Chinese influence in the Pacific. Expect more visits from high-level delegations in the months ahead as foreign governments scramble to secure influence in the South Pacific. Ivan Watson, CNN, Hong Kong.
Right, and straight ahead, a closer look at today's stronger than expected US jobs report. What does it mean for Chair Jay Powell and President Biden as they ramp up their battle against inflation? And we'll speak to JP Morgan's chief US economist after the break. Welcome back. US futures still pointing to a lower Wall Street open after the release of today's stronger than expected US jobs numbers. S&P 500 pointing down almost 1%. Dow Jones also under pressure. All right, so those job numbers really important. 390,000 jobs were added to the American economy in May. It was far higher than most had anticipated. Wage growth also remains very robust. Now, all this is pointing to a still solid US jobs market, even as the US Federal Reserve begins raising rates to help cool down inflation. Earlier this week, JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon warned of an economic hurricane that he believes is brewing as the Fed tightens and inflation remains high. Michael Ferrari joins me now. He is the chief US economist for JP Morgan. Michael, really good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us. These numbers even were higher than what you had anticipated. You had expected an increase of 375,000. We're sitting at 390,000. What are you reading into the latest jobs figures?
So I would say that's a pretty modest surprise in the grand scheme of things. But overall, I thought today's numbers were actually kind of welcome insofar as, yes, we got stronger than expected job growth, but we also had no change in the unemployment rate. We and others had expected that to decline. So that's been steady at 3.6 over the past 3 months. And I think that'll also be welcome to the Federal Reserve, who has been hiking rates, as you say, to cool the economy and really to prevent the unemployment rate from falling further. Yeah. And while average hourly earnings and wage growth remains strong, it has cooled some over the past several months. So some of that inflationary pressure, I wouldn't say it's going away, but it's at least moving marginally in the right direction. The Federal Reserve probably would like to see the unemployment rate actually move up modestly. So to the extent we actually got to stop declining, I think that's probably something they'd like to see here. Again, even though we got a little bit stronger than anticipated job growth last month.
Yeah, it's a balancing act, isn't it? I mean, what does this tell you? I mean, I understand these are for the month of May. We need to look ahead as well. But what does this tell you about what is to come? Because there's talk of recession, there's fear of the impact of inflation on spending power. If we dig in further into these numbers, the sectors that really did well was sort of leisure, retail, still looking pretty robust.
Yeah, that's right. I think what you're seeing in the industry detail is still a lot of that reopening hiring occurring, which is a long, drawn-out process. You got to remember, we're still over 800,000 jobs below where we were prior to the pandemic. So I think what you're seeing in the industry data is a lot of that normalization of sectoral activity. And I think in terms of recession concerns, I don't think anyone's concerned about recession May or June. But as we look ahead, and the Fed does need to continue to increase interest rates, that eventually will bring the economy to a standstill. Now, I think what this tells you about that is most interesting, as I said, in terms of what it tells you about where the Fed is going to have to go, right? So we know they're raising rates again, 0.5% in both June and July. And then the question really becomes what happens. The next live meeting after that is September. What does this tell us? Not much, but it is, to the extent we didn't see that further decline in the unemployment rate, may reduce some the odds that they have to go 0.5% in September. And to the extent the Fed can go a little more gradually, that would reduce some of those recession odds as we look out several months.
Yeah. So Michael, I have to ask you, Jamie Dimon coming out and saying, of course, the CEO of JP Morgan, coming out and saying, look, there's an economic hurricane brewing. When you were listening to that, were you surprised? Or is this because he's been looking at some of your forecasts and forecasting that he's making that statement?
Look, I think we've been warning about recession risks ever since the Fed had to really kind of step on the brakes a little more aggressively here. And historically, when the unemployment rate gets very low and the Fed starts raising interest rates, that's how you almost always get into recessions. There's a few exceptions when you have a pandemic, but generally, if you look in the post-war era, recessions follow Fed hiking cycles, and the Fed's in a hiking cycle now. So it's I think a very warranted concern, and some of our models would suggest over the next 2 years, the probability of recession is above 50%. Now, what the Fed needs to do
But
here,
is it,
as you said.
is it a hurricane? Is it an economic hurricane? Would you use that language as an economist? I know you like focusing on the numbers, but you know.
I mean, I think that's a one way of describing, a recession. Recessions are not fun. The unemployment rate generally goes up, considerably, and for those people who experience that, that's certainly a very, worrisome situation.
Absolutely.
So, but what I would say is, as you said, it's a balancing act. What the Fed has to do here is get growth to slow, but not slow so much that we turn into negative territory.
Yeah. So Elon Musk also said he has a very bad feeling about the economy. You guys are trying to do your modeling. You're trying to see all these externalities that are emerging because you don't really know what will happen in terms of supply demand. Are you also feeling relatively uneasy in terms of the modeling you have right now, that they're basically, based on a lot of things that we don't really know as yet? We don't know how this war is going to play out. We don't know what kind of supply disruptions are going to emerge.
I mean, our concerns about downside growth risks are certainly well above average compared to, I've been here 17 years. I would say this is a period when it does look like, the outlook is certainly very cloudy when it comes to prospects for growth. Not only the Fed hiking rates, but as you say, the hit to purchasing power from higher energy prices, the slowdown we're seeing in China. So there are a lot of worries out there, and certainly, so far we've been talking mostly about the domestic risk from higher interest rates from the Fed, but then we look globally and it's not a supportive backdrop right now. So I think it's not unreasonable to be a little bit worried about the outlook, certainly when you look out at least 12 months.
Exactly. Where is that crystal ball? Anyway, Michael Ferrari, thank you so much. Really good to see you. Okay, and still to come on CNN. Parents across the US are still struggling to find baby formula as the shortage in the country drags on. I speak to the CEO of one of the nation's newest formula manufacturers about helping meet demand. That's coming up next. Right, the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange. Trade has officially begun, and it's Friday. It is a down day, down 0.8%. Right, so, and of course, we've been expecting this all day. The futures have been showing a much lower open. This is despite the fact that we had much stronger than expected reads on American jobs growth numbers, suggesting that the US Federal Reserve still has a way to go before it cools down the economy enough to ease inflationary pressures. Now, Tesla shares are lower after Reuters reported that Elon Musk is looking to cut some 10% of the company's workforce. Musk also reportedly saying that he has, quote, a super bad feeling about the economy. Tesla shares down 6%. Another Western tech giant is leaving China. Amazon said it is shutting down its Kindle bookstore in the world's second largest economy. Kindle users will not be able to buy online books in the country starting June next year. The exit adds to a number of corporate retreats from the country as it fights to get a handle on the pandemic. We've got Selena Wang joining us now. Selena, give us details about Amazon's decision.
Well, Eleni, this just adds to that growing list, as you say, of these American tech giants that are either scaling back or pulling out completely from China. So Amazon made this announcement that it is going to be halting sales of its devices in the country, and it's also going to stop its Amazon Kindle digital business in China starting from next year. Now, this comes on the heels of you've got LinkedIn, Yahoo, Airbnb, all of these tech companies in recent months scaling back or completely pulling out from China. This is as you are seeing more pressure on both local and foreign tech companies in China from authorities. Part of that is part of the government's tightening control over content and data collection. Now, when it comes to Amazon in particular, in addition to the growing difficulty in the regulatory environment, they've also been struggling for years against their homegrown competitors, including Alibaba and JD.com. The market as well for these Kindle e-readers, for these digital books, that's also been falling as well for the sales of their devices. So also a growing market, even though this was a prominent business for them inside China. Now, Amazon has been in China for many, many years, but in 2019, they actually stopped their online domestic marketplace as that growing domestic competition was starting to tighten up. Now, this is what Amazon said in its statement, however, because the company does still have some business lines operating in the country, including advertising and cloud computing. Amazon said, quote, Amazon China's long-term commitment to customers will not change. We have established an extensive business foundation in China and will continue to innovate and invest. Now, also, Eleni, according to Reuters, importantly, the company says that it is not pulling out because of censorship concerns or because of government pressure. But the broader context here, of course, is that many, many websites and apps, media companies are blocked, banned from China, including Facebook, Google, YouTube, Twitter, countless others. Domestic companies, they have thrived within this walled environment, but they too face heavy censorship that is only getting more difficult. Eleni.
Selena Wang, good to see you. Thank you so much. Now, millions of parents across the United States are still struggling to find baby formula. The shortage highlights the issues the U.S. has depending on a handful of manufacturers for formula. ByHeart is hoping to fill that gap. The New York-based company is only the fifth infant formula manufacturer to receive regulatory approval in the United States and the first new manufacturer of baby formula in the country in 15 years. The company launched in March, right around the time Abbott, one of the nation's largest formula manufacturers, initiated a voluntary recall of its formula. Ron Baldegren, the co-founder and CEO of ByHeart, joins me now. Ron, really good to see you. Thank you so much for taking the time. I want to get into how you started this business, and I know that you're the new player on the block, but it's taken you many years to be able to do what you're doing right now. How difficult was it to break into a market that was dominated by a handful of players?
Yes, absolutely. Well, first of all, thanks very much for having me. I'll first say these are unusually disturbing times for babies and their parents. Mia, my co-founder and sister, and I are in it. My wife and I have a 2.5-year-old and now a 7-day-old baby. Mia has a 10-month-old currently drinking ByHeart. And, in a time of such joy and sleep deprivation and all the wonders of new parenthood, to also need to be worried, like so many parents are across the country, whether our babies will have, access to the very best nutrition is scary and simply unacceptable. As you pointed out, with our launch earlier this year, we became the first new infant formula manufacturer to be registered with FDA in over 15 years. And with that came a big responsibility. All of us at By Heart, from corporate to our manufacturing in Reading, Pennsylvania, are working tirelessly so that no parents need to feel that anxiety. But we're also reminded constantly of why we started this company. In a time of crisis, there's appropriately a lot of focus on getting formula on the shelf. But for us, it was never about just getting formula on a shelf. Parents deserve better. It was about getting the highest quality formula on the shelf. Infant formula is a critically important first food, sole source nutrition, while all baby systems are developing. We started this company because we are sitting in the most exciting era with breakthroughs in nutrition science. We know more about breast milk than we ever have, what drives the immune system, the gut microbiome, makes breast milk easy to digest when formula is often not. There has never been a bigger opportunity to create formulas that come closer to breast milk. Yeah. But until now, these breakthroughs are kind of outpacing new products getting into the hands of babies because the barriers to innovating in this category are so high, as you pointed out. 6 years ago, we decided to take an approach that no new entrant has in decades, and that was to really build entirely from scratch, because it's the only way to truly innovate.
Ron, I'm so glad that you said that this is, one of the most delicate moments for a mother, right? And here's the point: you want to know that you'll be able to get quality food for your child.
Hello?
And you get to the shelf and you're expecting it to be there. To be frank, I think the world was completely shocked that the United States was running out of baby formula. You opted not to work with established manufacturers because they wanted to control the ingredients, and that wasn't your game plan. Tell me about what you discovered in that process and the lack of innovation that is occurring despite the new knowledge we have about breast milk.
I'm so sorry, somebody just chimed into the Skype. Could you repeat the question? I think there was a disruption in the Skype.
Yeah, okay, so you opted not to work with established manufacturers at this point in time because they wanted to control the actual formula, despite the new knowledge that we have of breast milk. Give me a sense of what they were thinking.
Well, look, I think, this is, sole source nutrition for babies. This is appropriately the highest barrier to entry food in the world, the only food that requires clinical studies and FDA registration for real novel infant formulas. And, every company in, the last 15 years who have entered the space have kind of taken a similar path. And that was to outsource to the one and only contract manufacturer and rely on sort of an expedited path to market. That really only enables kind of incremental change to existing recipes. Now, we at By Heart got into this to really drive meaningful change and translate the major advancements in breast milk research and nutrition science into the very best products for babies. And in our view, there was only one way to do that, and that was to build from scratch. And so we brought together the world's experts to completely rewrite the recipe and conducted a major breakthrough clinical study to prove our benefits. As parents ourselves, we wanted evidence, not just claims. And we acquired our manufacturing facility and built direct control of our end-to-end process to really ensure highest quality ingredients and full accountability to parents from farm to formula.
Yeah, let's talk about farm to formula. The value chain is quite complex because it's not that easy to get new players into the market because everyone's thinking about market share being readily available. But here we've seen the worst case scenario playing out and the need to have more players in the market.
Yes, again, in the time of crisis, there's a lot of focus on getting product on the shelf. Right. But we need to remember that this is sole source nutrition in a time when all of baby systems are developing. And therefore, it is critical to provide really the highest quality and best nutrition. Nutrition in this critical time of development needs to work much harder for us. And so our approach was really a belief that the more you control the process, the more you can impact the quality of the formula. And so we wanted to go out and buy our manufacturing facility in Reading, Pennsylvania, directly handpick and source all of our own ingredients right from partners that we know and trust to ensure the highest quality ingredients. And we wanted to work with the experts to really translate really major advancements in breast milk research into a formula that would get closer than ever before to breast milk, and kind of be this more kind of wholesome and functional alternative to breast milk.
Yeah, Ron, and just very quickly, do you think that the United States, in terms of supply dynamics right this minute, are in a better position with new entrants like you in the market?
Look, we participated yesterday in the administration's roundtable, and what I heard at the meeting with the president was encouraging. I applaud all the other 4 companies in the space that are ramping up production and doing the utmost in this area. The administration's efforts have been commendable as short-term solutions to a very pressing issue. Import and some of these steps that have been taken, will be helpful in getting formula into the hands of babies quickly. Our approach has been one to build, sustainable solution. This supply chain in the U.S. is far too fragile. We can't be in a situation where one company has a recall and 40% of the country is without sole source nutrition. And so we, as one of just 5 companies in the country that manufacture infant formula, are taking this responsibility very seriously. And we are investing heavily into initiatives that collectively can allow up to another 500,000 new families to get fed, even above our initial plan. We are investing heavily in our manufacturing in Reading, Pennsylvania, with a $30 million new investment. We are hiring aggressively. We're adding a whole new shift. We're moving to 24/7. We are moving to expand our manufacturing footprint. And so there isn't a lever that we aren't pulling, and we're doing that all here in the United States.
Ron, thank you so much for your time. Really good to have you on the show. Much appreciated. And thank you for you at home joining us on today's show. Marketplace Europe is up next. From me, Eleni Jakas. Take care.
Luxury has never looked so glamorous. I'm your host, Anna Stewart. This month, how the luxury sector wants to keep the good times rolling. Hello and welcome to Marketplace Europe. This month we are at the Watches and Wonders trade show in Geneva. Take a look because all the big watch brands and all of the watch fans are here, and it's the first time they've been able to gather in person for 3 years. So imagine the excitement to finally get your hands on some of the most extravagant, most expensive timepieces in the world. After years of waiting, there's no time like the present. Watchmakers have dealt with pandemic restrictions for years. Now they want to make up for that lost time. At the end of last year, Deloitte asked Swiss watch executives how they judged the outlook for 2022. More than 3/4 of them said they were feeling positive.
The industry has shown resilience, remarkable resilience in the last 2 years, going through COVID and coming out now more or less. I think watch and jewelry industry is thriving in a way, and this will certainly help.
Deloitte says travelers and in-store shoppers are the lifeblood of the luxury watch industry. So for executives in Geneva, their return is a moment to savor.
Something I guess we dreamed of, but didn't really truly believe it would happen until the last minute, because we've learned to adapt ourselves to, always changing environment. This is very important to be back physically, because we are, of course, in an industry where the touch and feel of our product makes a lot of sense.
With that in mind, it's only fair that I get a close-up look at what these brands have to offer.
What you see here is the Atmos Ibris Mechanica Tellurium, so the novelty of 2022, in a brand new design, totally transparent, with a circular glass that also represents in a way the permanent motion of Atmos. So it's very natural, very rounded.
Without trade shows like these, watch houses have been pushed to innovate. Whether it's new watchmaking tech or ways to try something on using only your smartphone. The head of IWC says the industry is learning to adapt.
We have learnt a lot during the pandemic years, how to reach more of our clients globally more effectively and more efficiently. And that's why the hybrid format, the digital technology is now coming here to Watches and Wonders and making this a truly transversal event. We are using the whole creative force of what we can bring to the market. We're interacting with our clients on new channels and new ways. And we're making sure that whatever the situation is globally, we stay in touch with our clients and we make sure we provide the best product we possibly can.
And it's not just how to sell watches that's changed, it's the jewellery itself. Tag Heuer's centrepiece this year is a timepiece covered in lab-grown diamonds. The Carrera Plasma is worth some $375,000. Frederic Arnault says it's his brand's way of standing out.
We've innovated throughout our history, and we wanted to try and be the first to really have an ambitious vision on lab-grown diamonds. And our approach was, if we go there, we need to offer something radically different.
So you can't wear it yet, but perhaps we can go and have a look.
Let's go, definitely.
Who in the world is going to buy one of these?
We already have a few calls.
You already have a wait list.
You already have a wait list, but we're going to keep it limited in production. We don't want to produce too many.
That's important, keeping the volume down to keep the luxury feel to it.
It's important to have the right balance between offer and demand, and always produce one watch less than what the market wants.
The buyers are back. The watch companies are just glad to be seeing them in person. In an industry known for big price tags, there's a certain prestige to being the priciest. Now, Patek Philippe has the record for the most expensive watch ever sold. A Grandmaster chime sold for more than $31 million at an auction in 2019. And now the brand has become an icon of pop culture as well as the luxury world. I spoke to the president, Thierry Stern. If some of these watches look familiar, you're either a watch connoisseur or a serious hip-hop fan. Whether it's Cardi B, or Jay-Z and Beyonce. Patek Philippe, which dates back to 1837, has today become the rapper's brand of choice. In fact, the lyrics website Genius said the company was mentioned in a third of songs on the Billboard Hot 100 back in 2017. Quite a shift for a company that counted Queen Victoria as one of its early clients. Your brand is steeped in heritage and history. It's also more recently become synonymous with bling, with hip-hop artists. Probably not a direction you saw it going in, but how does it make you feel?
Well, of course, I didn't plan that, but I mean, everybody likes watches. So you can be a singer or you can be a painter. For me, I'm okay with that, you know, as long as you appreciate what I'm doing, you know. But I'm also talking about people with Bitcoins, NFT, who are making a lot of money. Those clients are maximum, I would say 30 years old. And they're willing to have a Patek Philippe, and not the cheapest one, but they are knowledgeable. They took the time also to learn about the watches. They have the money, but they are smart also. So yes, for me that's fine, as long as you are enjoying what you are buying. You know, you have to wear your watch and have pleasure with it.
The waiting list for some Patek watches can take up to 8 years. Now the company's chosen to discontinue one of its biggest models rather than try to keep up with demand. For Thierry Stern, that's a delicate, deliberate strategy. Let's talk about one of your older models, the 5711. You caused a huge stir by discontinuing it. Why would you stop making such a popular watch?
Well, for two reasons. The first one, we never like to keep a watch too long in the collection. My objective is also to protect you as a client. When you buy such a valuable watch, the price should maintain or even go higher. And the only way to do that is to stop the watch. The second one is that I need to be creative. I'm not willing to be a brand with just one single product. My objective is to follow the guideline of Patek Philippe, to be creative, innovative, and never just stop, you know, in the middle of something.
We're going to go upstairs and have a look at some of your latest models. What are you going to show me?
So it's a nice mix of new ID and vintage style. I hope you will like it.
Now this one I've seen outside. This is a brand new launch.
This is totally new, so this will be for me, I think, the highlight for Patek Philippe for this fair. It's what we call an annual calendar with a travel time system. This is a dial. My idea came, to be frank, from an old camera. And when I look at it, I say, I like this style. So I decided to create a dial who looks a little bit like an old camera. Now, if you look at the case, you also have on the side what we call Clou de Paris. This is the DNA from my grandfather. It was already in the collection.
This is the texture around
and this is the texture you see on the side. So I took the past, took the future, and I mixed them. This is really what I like to do.
You've got huge passion for watchmaking.
Of course, because it's such a great business, you know. For me, it's not a business, to be frank. It's more now a pleasure to enjoy really doing what I like, you know. When I was a child, I was looking in the drawer of my dad, and I say, I would like to do that. I have to go at 110%. That's what I expect from my team, for myself, and that's what our client expect from us. We are Patek Philippe. We have to go further.
After the break on Marketplace Europe, inflation is pushing prices up right across the continent, and it could mean record revenues for the kings and queens of luxury. every other industry, prices in the luxury sector are heading up and up. However, when your client's already expecting to spend big, the impact of inflation can look very different. Nina Dos Santos has more from London.
If there's one thing that sets the luxury sector apart, it's the price tags. And as inflation takes hold across Europe, goods which were already expensive are only becoming more so.
For firms selling everyday items like food and consumer goods, high prices can seriously harm sales. For the luxury sector, however, they can be a badge of honour.
Rolex have increased their prices, Chanel have increased their prices, LVMH, obviously. There is this arms race going on between brands. They need to maintain exclusivity and desirability.
As prices have gone up, luxury sales have not slowed down. Last year, Kering saw record revenues, while LVMH said that brands like Dior, Fendi and Tiffany all enjoyed record sales too. It might take more than high prices to scare away the loyal luxury buyers.
But for what we think of as our classic luxury consumer, they care less. You know, where inflation is biting in food, in oil, in gas, you know, the percentage of their income that they're spending on these will be minuscule compared to the mid-tier luxury consumer.
The inflationary pressures are real for the luxury brands, whether it's production costs or raw materials, and companies aren't afraid to take action. Take, for instance, Chanel, which has raised prices aggressively several times over the past year. But what's different about the luxury sector is that customers are already expecting to spend big, and they're expecting the highest quality.
Other sectors are focused on mass production and trimming costs. That's not the goal in high fashion. Hermès says that handmade goods won't be hit by rising energy costs, for example.
Europe's luxury sector won't return to its pre-COVID size until 2024, according to a study by Bain & Company. And rising energy costs and tighter supply chains won't make that any easier. But higher prices haven't bothered the luxury industry too much so far, and they might not bother its customers for now either. Nina Dos Santos, CNN.
That's it for this month's Marketplace Europe. You can take a closer look at our reporting at cnn.com/MPE. For now, from Geneva, goodbye.
I can hardly sit, she says. My legs are swollen. Can I just get back to Kherson, or is this some kind of cruel joke? Please, just let me die in Kherson, at home.
100 days into Russia's war in Ukraine with little achieved except bloodshed and pain. Plus... Well, it's a who's who of British royalty and politics at the Jubilee celebrations with one rather significant absentee. And an important first meeting with a key US partner. Joe Biden will meet face-to-face with Saudi Arabia's de facto ruler later this month. Hello, I'm Becky Anderson in London. It's 3 p.m. here. Welcome to Connect the World. 100 days of war with no end in sight. Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine has caused thousands of needless deaths and misery for millions more. All the while, the Ukrainian military has defied predictions that Russia would conquer the entire country within a matter of days or even hours. Ukraine's president marking this somber milestone with a vow his country will win.
The leaders of parliamentary factions are here. The president's chief of staff is here. Prime Minister of Ukraine, Shmyhal, is here. Podolyak is here. The president is here. Our team is much bigger. The armed forces of Ukraine are here. Most importantly, our people, the people of our country, are here. We have been defending Ukraine for 100 days. Victory shall be ours. Glory to Ukraine.
Ukraine's military says its forces are still holding some areas of Severodonetsk. That is the main focus of Russia's offensive in the Donbass right now. Russia controls most of the city. Thousands of Ukrainians remain there, including some 800 said to be hiding in bomb shelters under a chemical plant. Well, British intelligence assesses that Severodonetsk and its twin city of Lysychansk likely will fall to Russia within a couple of weeks. At that point, Russia would control all of the Luhansk region in the Donbass. The intel report also summarising where we are 100 days into this war. Stuck in the mud. It says Russia's other war objectives have so far failed, and achieving victory would take considerably more time and a continued huge investment of manpower and equipment. Well, Ben Wiedemann connecting us today from the Ukrainian capital of Kiev. 100 days of war. Many gave Ukraine less than 72 hours. I guess it does, though, beg the question, what has been achieved and what's next, Ben?
Well, that's interesting because Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesman, was asked that very question today, and his response was telling. He said certain results have been achieved, and he focused on the Luhansk and Donetsk area in eastern Ukraine without mentioning the debacle, which was the Russian military operation here around the Ukrainian capital. What we have seen is that the amount of death and destruction has been massive. For instance, Russia now controls 20% of Ukrainian territory compared to around 7% before the 24th of February. Thousands of people here in Ukraine have been killed. Exactly how many we don't know, but for instance, in the port city of Mariupol alone, Ukrainian officials say as many as 21,000 civilians may have been killed. Now, President Zelensky is saying, as far as the military, that at this point in time, somewhere between 60 and 100 Ukrainian soldiers are being killed every day, most of them, of course, in the eastern Donbass region where fighting is most intense. The Ukrainian Parliament's Human Rights Committee says that 38,000 buildings have been destroyed as a result of the war, and the country's GDP has fallen by 35%. 20%. As far as Russia goes, they've also suffered huge losses, although Russian authorities have been shy to say exactly how many men or how much equipment they've lost. But U.S. officials estimate that Russia's military strength overall, and I'm not talking about just Ukraine, has been diminished by as much as 20%. Russia is now under about 5,000 targeted sanctions. $300 billion of its foreign assets have been frozen. We've seen Sweden and Finland apply for membership in NATO. Europe is growing something of a backbone when it comes to Russia. So much has changed, and it certainly seems that sort of if you look at the balance sheet, Ukraine is holding on. It has defied all expectations, and the Russian performance on the battlefield has been nothing short of catastrophic. Becky?
Ben, a defiant video from the Ukrainian president earlier on, flanked by other Ukrainian leaders. Certainly a sense that he will not give up in the face of this Russian aggression. You're in Kyiv. What's the mood amongst sort of average Ukrainians at this point? Does it reflect that sense of defiance that we hear from the Ukrainian president?
Well, I mean, for instance, what we've seen here in Kyiv is that many of the people who fled as Russian forces were approaching the city have returned. When you drive around the capital, it looks like a nice European city enjoying warm early June weather. But I think beyond the surface appearances, I think there is an understanding among ordinary people that perhaps victory will come at some point, but the struggle, the war is going to be difficult, the war is going to be long, and the costs for ordinary Ukrainians and Russians will continue to mount. Becky?
Ben Wiedemann's in Kyiv for you on the ground in Ukraine. I want to bring in Jill Doherty. Thank you, Ben. CNN's contributor on Russian affairs and former CNN Moscow bureau chief. Ben, we've just heard from Ben on the ground in Kyiv, getting us a sense of the perspective through the eyes of the Ukrainian authorities and people. What's your assessment of where this war is after 100 days and where it might go next?
The word that comes to mind, really, Becky, is just kind of grinding on. The way I look at it, I think Putin has changed the goalpost at least 3 times, concentrating on Donbass in the beginning, saying that it was a genocide against the Russian speakers in that region, and then broadening it to the rest of Ukraine. Unable to accomplish that, then moving back and concentrating on the east and the Donbass and that region down to connect to Crimea. But I think, it really is, the head of NATO did call it or predicted that it would be a long war of attrition. And I really do believe, sadly, that that is what we are looking at right now. And why I think that is that, I watched the Russian side of this because that is my area of experience and expertise. And right now in Russia, I really do believe that President Putin is trying to make the Russian people and the world kind of forget about this war, because there is not a happy, strong feeling, that Russia is victorious. It's a very dark mood in Russia. I was there in March, and I just came back, by the way, a few days ago from the Baltics. And in Russia right now, it's this feeling that, it has to continue, that we are under attack, that NATO, maybe not even Ukraine, it's really NATO, the West, and most of all, the United States, that are the danger to Russia. And I think if I were to sum it up, I'd say there's a lot of kind of anger and resentment of the West, but also a balancing between that, Becky. And this is the hard thing, I think, for Putin. He has to keep his people angry and furious at the West at the same time that he is faced perhaps with the decision about mobilizing the entire country. And I don't think you can kind of, blend those. He's tried to keep the Russian people feeling that this war isn't really costing them as much as it actually is. But if he mobilizes, it will be very obvious that it is going to cost average Russians. So it's as I said, it's a dark feeling.
It's good to get your analysis. A good piece on CNN today on digital by our former Moscow bureau chief, Nathan Hodge, entitled "After 100 Days of War, Putin is Counting on the World's Indifference." You described it as Putin hoping that the rest of the world would just sort of forget that this was going on. I think that sense of indifference certainly is one that's... that hope of a sense of indifference is one that I think Putin is holding out for. And to a certain extent, there may be something in that, because although we are seeing the unity hold in Europe, Europe continues with its 6th round of sanctions, for example, as it continues to try and, stop the amount of money that Russia has got to fund this war. There is a sense of war fatigue at this point, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. And I think, it's in the West. I think it's also in Russia. And that would play very well for Putin, because if the world does forget about Ukraine, then the support for Ukraine diminishes. And at the same time, I think that Putin's other objective is, no question, divide the West. Divide NATO, divide the West, do what you can just to tear away that unity that really is quite unique, that was built up at the beginning of the war. And those two things would really just be exactly what he would want to happen.
Jill, it's always a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. As our viewers who have been with us over the years will know, Jill was for many years the Moscow bureau chief for CNN. Thank you, Jill. Well, let's take a closer look at the situation in southern Ukraine. A Ukrainian military official says it is systematically counter-attacking Russian troops in the Kherson region. As the fighting steps up in the south, many desperate Ukrainians have fled for the relative safety of Zaporizhia. That's where CNN's Melissa Bell talked with some of them.
Alive and safe, but stuck in Zaporizhia. Some of the families that fled the Russian bombings of southern Ukraine. Others have just found themselves on the wrong side of a line that has hardened. Some of these families, now living in their cars, have been here for weeks. Olena Babak came from the Black Sea town of Skadovsk to buy medicine for her elderly parents. She's now living with others in the open air. Look, she says, he's just had surgery. My husband's without a leg. This grandmother is recovering from a stroke. I can hardly sit, she says. My legs are swollen. Can I just get back to Kherson, or is this some kind of cruel joke? Please, just let me die in Kherson, at home. Some of the families bringing their anger to Zaporizhia's regional administrative building.
What's the problem? Why?
Like Alexei Ismailov, who fled Mariupol with his wife, but has had no contact with the rest of his family for 3 months.
They still stay in Mariupol. And during 3 months, I don't have any contact. What happened with my father, with my sister, I like come back and help. I like bring them to Ukrainian.
Marina Notanova, who's in charge of social services for the greater Zaporizhia region, says humanitarian aid has been hard to bring because her teams to the south of the city are now without communications. She tells us that it will also be necessary to tell those trying to return of the dangers they face. It's very dangerous there, she says, so this will be discussed with them at this new filtration camp to find out why they want to go and whether they understand the risks. She says that beyond the water already being provided here, there will soon be a medical center, showers, and a room for mothers and children. For now, these families wait, just hungry to get home. Melissa Bell, CNN, Zaporizhia.
Much of the world has shunned Vladimir Putin for launching the war in Ukraine. Not all of it. But the head of the African Union travelled to Russia to meet with Mr. Putin. Senegalese President Macky Sall spoke to the Russian leader about how the war is impacting food supplies in Africa. Ukraine says half of its grain harvest has been lost, and what has been harvested cannot be shipped because of Russian blockade. CNN's David Mackenzie has been tracking African reaction to what's happening in Ukraine. He joins us now live from Johannesburg. Look, you know, we talk about the sort of the world's outrage. We are also, it has to be clear, you know, looking at a divided world here, much of which has been relatively neutral on this, including many African nations. Just explain what we understand this meeting to have been about and what impact this war is having on particularly sub-Saharan Africa.
Well, Becky, you raise a very important point, because while the solidarity amongst NATO countries has been pretty uniform and very robust in the reaction to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, it is a much more complex picture around the world. And not just countries in Africa that are kind of standing on the sidelines, not commenting either way. There have even been countries that have been pro-Russia in their outlook. And now, interestingly, just a short time ago, the Kremlin dropped, in their estimation, a readout of this meeting. They said that Putin praised the emergence of the African countries as a global player, as you might expect, given the circumstances. But interestingly, it said that the chairman of the African Union, the Senegalese president, explained to Putin that Africa does have diverse viewpoints, and specifically said, and it must be said according to this Kremlin readout, that there were several countries that have yet to condemn Russia at the United Nations. What it didn't talk about is a critical problem that many countries face on this continent and in parts of the Middle East, is the impact of the grain blockade that Russia has forced on Ukraine, and the sanctions that Russia is also struggling to get its grain and particularly fertilizer out. Many countries on this continent could face a very severe crisis in the coming months because of that, if this war continues beyond 100 days, as it will. Becky?
David Mackenzie on the story for you. Thank you. Just ahead. Well, as bells rang out from one of the world's great cathedrals, Britain's Queen Elizabeth is praised for staying the course, and she was sorely missed at this event. I'll explain why she didn't turn up after this. Promise made and kept. 70 years of constancy for Britain and for the Commonwealth by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. And a short time ago, members of the British royal family, as well as representatives from the Commonwealth and those who do good without fanfare, gathered at St Paul's Cathedral in London to honour the Queen at the Platinum Jubilee service of Thanksgiving. A poignant note here, we are told the Queen watched the service from her home in Windsor. The 96-year-old monarch forced to skip the occasion after experiencing some discomfort on Thursday during what was the kick-off to Jubilee celebrations. But today, this happened. Well, as St Paul's bells rang out, cheers went up for the arrival of Prince Harry and his wife Meghan, the first time that they've been seen in public in Britain for more than 2 years. Well, joining me now is CNN royal historian Kate Williams, and that is the big bell at St Paul's, newly reconditioned for the occasion, as the Brits are wont to do. And boy, did it ring out, did it peal this morning. For the a celebration of the Queen's Jubilee, a service which was not attended by Her Majesty. Why is that, Kate?
Yes, well, it's very poignant that she wasn't able to attend. So many people there celebrating her reign, celebrating also her role as head of the Church of England. She wanted to be there, but we understand that there were real mobility problems after yesterday. It was obviously a long day standing outside on the balcony. She is nearly 100. She's been in such incredible health throughout her reign. We really did, if we think back 10 years ago, Becky, you and I watching the Diamond Jubilee, it did seem possible just in the London Olympics that she might have been jumping out of a helicopter, but no longer. And really, I think it's incredible how much she's done. She obviously felt it was too tiring yesterday and to watch it from home, but it will be really hard for her to watch it from home because this was a great celebration of her reign, 70 years on the throne, both of the Queen and also how much Britain and the world has changed.
4 days of events, a couple of days of decent weather. It is expected to lash with rain over the weekend, but that will not stop people who are having street parties, etc. 4 days of celebrations that the other members of the royal family then will be very much a part of. Aside from, of course, William and Harry, Harry and Meghan, who are not working royals anymore, but there were cheers when they arrived at St Paul's Cathedral today. What do you make of that?
Huge cheers when they arrived, absolutely huge cheers. I think people are thrilled to see them back in the royal fold. They're thrilled to see the family together again. And there really does seem to be a lot of movement there, a lot of friendship. We understand that the Queen met Lilibet, her latest great-grandchild, yesterday, and they will be attending a little birthday party for at Frogmore Cottage. And I think really once we see outside of some of the press coverage of Harry and Meghan, which has been very negative, we start to see that really this is a family and they are there to support the Queen.
Watching an event like this and knowing that we'll never see, and we're very unlikely to see another Jubilee, I suppose you shouldn't say never again, but, you know, it's very likely that you know, at some point it'll be King Charles. What happens to the royal family at this point? What's the sense? What will they be going forward? What's their relevance these days?
Well, yes, that's a good question. Is a celebration that we're seeing, this huge, spectacular party, the Trooping the Colour yesterday, is it for the Queen, for her, or is it for the monarchy? And it is my feeling, my suspicion, that quite a lot of this is about the individual, the young woman who promised in when she was just young, in 1947, that she would serve her whole life. She came to the throne in 53, seen the whole of the 20th century. I think there's going to be a change when Charles comes to the throne. I think that many countries we already know are going to no longer have the monarch of head of state. Barbados has moved, Jamaica said they will, Australia, Antigua, Belize also. That's going to change. And I think there will be more questions about transparency, about spending, that I think historians of the future will look back on this monarchy, on this day, as really marking the high watermark of monarchy.
She's a very discreet woman. Will she have been enjoying this?
Well, the palace tend to say that the Queen doesn't really care that much about milestones, but in her heart they are important to her. And I think she was thrilled to see the crowds yesterday, all the celebration, all the popularity. She knows that she's been through good times and bad times, been really difficult, real drops in popularity, such as the 1990s, the death of Princess Diana, that now at the end of her reign, she's seeing all this love for her. I think it's very gratifying.
It's always a pleasure. It's been some time. Nice to see you. You can find all the very latest on the Queen's Platinum Jubilee at CNN.com, including more about the French president's gift of a horse to mark the occasion. Well, almost 20 years ago, photographer Rob Munday shot the first ever holographic portrait of the Queen. Well, now he has unveiled a new portrait to celebrate her Platinum Jubilee. He says the image had been sitting untouched in his personal archive all of this time. Have a look at this.
I'd taken this short video sequence. It was only 1 second long, and I'd completely forgotten about it. It's lain on the hard drive for nearly 19 years. But I was inquisitive, so I looked inside this directory and saw that there were 32 frames in total. And I, thought I'll have a look at them. But as I was thumbing through, right in the middle, there was just this one frame that just kind of leaped out at me. The frames either side of it, again, would have been totally unusable. This one was almost God-given, if I say so. It was just a beautiful image, and I just thought, I looked at it, I kept looking at it, and then you start asking yourself the question, is it really good, or is it just me wanting it to be good? So, of course, I got people to come and have a look, my wife being one, and I said, look, what do you think of this, I said, I think it looks completely natural, unposed, very beautiful. She's full of life, she has that whimsical smile, twinkle in the eye. It was a very jovial atmosphere for that sitting, and there were jokes were being told and people were laughing all the time. Angela Kelly, her very, very long-term personal assistant, dresser, and a very, very good friend of the Queen, said something funny that precise moment. I hadn't realised when I actually did the shot, it was just a coincidence. This is why I just loved it so much, because it's just a really, really natural portrait. I mean, a lot of people have told me that they've never seen a portrait quite like it.
Right, let's get you up to speed on some of the other stories that are on our radar right now, folks. And as much of the world marks Pride Month, Kuwait summoned the US Embassy's charge d'affaires over this tweet, quoting President Joe Biden, saying LGBTQI people should be treated with dignity and be able to live without fear. Homosexuality and being transgender is illegal in Kuwait. Its foreign ministry said the US Embassy should respect its laws and not publish such tweets. Well, with prices soaring around the world, Turkey is seeing a 24-year spike. Inflation for May was up by 73.5% over last year. That's the highest rate since 1988, driven by skyrocketing food and fuel costs as it becomes harder for people to afford just the basic necessities. Well, in southern Germany, at least 4 people are dead and 60 injured in a train accident in the Alps. Rescue operations are ongoing. Local media report school children were aboard that train. Today was the last day of school in the Bavaria region of Germany. Well, you're watching Connect the World. I'm Becky Anderson. Coming up, not long ago, Joe Biden cast away Saudi Arabia as a pariah state. Well, now he seems to have had a change of heart. Why? We'll discuss that up next. I'm Becky Anderson. You're watching Connect the World live from London, where the time is 3:30. The US jobs report for May was just released. And the good news, maybe also bad news, here's why. Employers added 390,000 jobs to the US economy last month. That was more than was expected. The unemployment rate stayed at 3.6%. That is still near record low territory. However, if jobs growth remains solid and Americans have more money to spend, that could, of course, continue to push up inflation, and that could force the Fed to tighten economic conditions more aggressively. Well, the US President Joe Biden is expected to comment on the job situation any moment now, and we'll get to him when he does. First, let's bring in CNN correspondent Rahel Solomon to further break down these numbers. I mean, the Fed is really stuck between a rock and a hard place at this point, isn't it? What's the current thinking about what they do next to deal with this US economy?
Good to be with you, Becky. Yeah, I spoke with one economist after the numbers crossed and asked, from your perspective, what does this jobs report mean for the White House and for the Fed? And she said, look, they will be pleased with this report because, yes, to your point, Becky, it was hotter than expected, that top line number of 390,000 jobs being added. It is a signal that jobs may be cooling. I want to show you sort of job growth the last few months. This 390,000, the lowest we have seen in more than a year. That number has usually hovered at least at 400,000. When you take a look at April, 436. March was revised to about 398. So again, still close to 400,000 for the last 12 months. And of course, there have been some months like February where we saw quite a bit more, 714,000. So the fact that we're now starting to see, Becky, numbers come in that are in the threes, that is a sign of a slowing in the economy, which the Fed wants to see, which the White House wants to see. Of course, we got President Biden's op-ed earlier this week, which started to warn and started to suggest that in this new phase of the economy we're in, this maturing of the economy and the expansion that we have been in, we will see lower jobs growth. I also want to tell you, Becky, where the jobs are in this jobs report. Looks like leisure and hospitality adding another 84,000 jobs. Professional and business services, another 75,000, and perhaps, very importantly, transportation and warehousing, truck drivers being added. We know there have been such a shortage of truck drivers, so 47,000 being added to the economy here. So yes, to Neela Richardson's point, the Fed is going to want to see this because, as we know, and as we talk about quite often, the Fed is trying to bring about a slow landing, an easy landing. They don't want to sort of pump the brakes on the economy, and so the number sort of trailing down is a sign that could be happening. We know we are going to hear from President Biden shortly on the jobs report. Of course, we will bring you those comments when they cross. But we have been hearing, we heard that op-ed earlier this week from President Biden that jobs would start to slow. You could argue, however, that they would like to see numbers in the one range, about 150,000 jobs being added, because as it stands now and as it has, Becky, the jobs market has been so hot. There has been so much demand for workers that there are about 2 open jobs right now for every unemployed worker. So what the Fed is trying to do is bring a bit of balance in the jobs market and sort of bring that number to meet an equal point without having to really increase joblessness. So it is a tough job for them. Remains to be seen if they will be able to pull it off in terms of this soft landing and being able to avoid a recession.
Nobody said it was easy. I mean, Jamie Dimon talking about facing a hurricane. Elon Musk saying he doesn't like the look of where the economy is at present. I mean, much talk of, a recession out there, potentially. That is what the Fed is trying to head off at the moment while ensuring that they don't allow that economy to take off too much. Thank you, Rahel. It's good to have you on. While the state of the economy remains a vital domestic challenge internationally, Joe Biden's got a full plate and perhaps a change in tone, at least. For the first time since taking office, the US president will meet face-to-face with Saudi Arabia's de facto ruler, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, later this month. Now, this after campaigning on making Saudi Arabia a pariah state and actively avoiding the Crown Prince, also known as MBS, for almost 2 years. Now, this announcement comes after 2 key deals were reached on Thursday. OPEC Plus agreeing to boost oil production by 200,000 barrels per day in the summer months, and the extension of a UN-brokered truce in Yemen. Now, both of those have a Riyadh dimension, of course. Officials tell CNN the timing of the announcements is deliberate and is laying the groundwork for a likely meeting between the two leaders. Well, I want to bring in CNN White House reporter Natasha Bertrand, who's been following the details around this announcement closely. She joins me now live from Washington. As I understand it, we don't actually have a date confirmed, but it's looking like a trip at the end of the month. And we are well aware that relations between Riyadh and Washington, a key US partner in the Middle East region, have been very strained over the past couple of years. So we know there's been some work behind the scenes going on. These two key announcements, though, clearly helping repair this relationship, Natasha.
Major diplomatic breakthroughs. That is what our sources are describing these as, especially the announcement by OPEC Plus that it will increase production of oil by about 200,000 barrels per day in July and August. Now, that is not that much, right? But for the Biden administration, which has been essentially pleading with OPEC and with Saudi Arabia, frankly, for the last year to increase production and getting flatly rejected at every turn, it is a big deal. And what officials are crediting that to is their diplomatic heavy lifting over the last year to repair the relationship between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia, which, of course, had been very damaged by President Biden's mentality towards the Saudis, which has been to make them a global pariah. That is what he campaigned on. He has said that he is very opposed, of course, to their litany of human rights abuses, and he has not spoken with MBS directly since taking office. He has preferred to speak with his father, the King of Saudi Arabia, kind of cutting MBS out deliberately. So this is a big deal, and it's a big turnaround for the U.S.-Saudi relationship. And it's a recognition that the Saudis are going to be necessary for U.S. national security policy, for U.S. economic policy, especially as the United States tries to isolate the Russians increasingly, of course, as a result of the war in Ukraine. They recognize, and this is kind of realpolitik winning here, that they need the Saudis kind of in their orbit to have a solid relationship with them, despite the human rights abuses, of course, that Joe Biden has called out repeatedly. So this is likely to get some heat back at home domestically. Groups are already calling out the Biden administration for the seeming reversal, saying that it is, not consistent with his promise to put human rights back at the center of foreign policy, to meet directly with MBS. But this is really a success of two key members of his administration who have been traveling back and forth to Saudi Arabia for months and months, trying to repair this relationship, Becky.
Fascinating. We work out of the region, and so it's been clear that there's been much work going on behind the scenes, and it's interesting to see where this is landing at present. Thank you. Right, we are going to take a very short break. Well, in the United States, President Joe Biden delivered a primetime address Thursday night demanding a response from lawmakers to an epidemic of gun violence in America after what has been a series of deadly mass shootings. This report filed by my colleague Jeremy Diamond.
After a spate of mass shootings,
how much more carnage are we willing to accept? How many more innocent American lives must be taken before we say enough?
President Biden making his most fervent and specific appeal yet for stricter gun laws.
We need to ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. And if we can't ban assault weapons, then we should raise the age to purchase them from 18 to 21. Strengthen background checks. Enact safe storage law and red flag laws. Repeal the immunity that protects gun manufacturers from liability. Address the mental health crisis.
The president demanding action during a rare primetime address as a somber line of 56 candles burned behind him, representing victims of gun violence from every U.S. state and territory. Biden's speech comes after he and the First Lady visited the grieving communities of Uvalde, Texas, and Buffalo, New York. He implored the country and Congress to act now.
After Columbine, after Sandy Hook, after Charleston, after Orlando, after Las Vegas, after Parkland, nothing has been done. This time that can't be true.
The president stressing this isn't about harming lawful gun owners.
I respect the culture and the tradition and the concerns of lawful gun owners. At the same time, the Second Amendment, like all other rights, is not absolute.
And arguing guns are the #1 killer of children in this country, according to the CDC.
More than car accidents, more than cancer. Over the last 2 decades, more school-age children have died from guns than on-duty police officers and active-duty military combined.
Biden hasn't ruled out additional executive action, but as a bipartisan group of senators negotiate a potential compromise package, the president saying it's now up to Congress to act. On Thursday, the House Judiciary Committee met for a 10-hour-long session during a recess week to debate a gun reform package. One measure included Biden's proposal to raise the age to purchase some assault rifles from 18 to 21. The package was passed along a party-line vote.
What's wrong with raising the age for semi-automatic rifles?
Unconstitutional. Even the Ninth Circuit just said it was unconstitutional.
Spare me the bullshit about constitutional rights.
But in the Senate, that proposal faces stiff Republican resistance, a political reality Biden acknowledged.
Don't tell me raising the age won't make a difference. Enough. My God. The fact that the majority of the Senate Republicans don't want any of these proposals even to be debated or come up for a vote, I find unconscionable.
Well, that's Joe Biden delivering that message to the American people last night. Jeremy Diamond reporting for us there. We are waiting to hear from US President Joe Biden. The latest job numbers out of the States have just been released. The numbers are, on the face of it, look pretty good. But that's the fear that this economy needs slowing down somewhat. The president will address the US economy. As soon as he does, we will get to that. Meantime, several Shanghai neighbourhoods have been put back into lockdown due to a handful of positive COVID tests. The shutdown came just a day after the Chinese government reopened much of Shanghai. The city had been like a ghost town for 2 months due to what has been this incredibly strict zero COVID policy. Selena Wang with the latest for you.
Freedom was short-lived for many in Shanghai. Just a day after the city started exiting a brutal 2-month lockdown, multiple neighborhoods were placed back under lockdown for 14 days. Starting on June 1st, Shanghai began allowing most of its 25 million residents to leave their communities. But nearly 2 million were still confined to their homes because they had recent COVID cases in their areas. Now, the policy across China is that every positive COVID case and close contact must go to quarantine facilities. The community where the cases are found also then go into lockdown. So as a result of just 7 new COVID cases in Shanghai, more than 100 people were sent to government quarantine and 4 neighborhoods were sealed off. People in Shanghai still remain on edge. haunted by fears of a renewed lockdown. On Thursday morning, crowds were seen fleeing from a mall because people feared a COVID case was found and the mall was going to lock down. The mall later said it temporarily closed to disinfect, without confirming whether there was a COVID case there. In cities across China, including Shanghai and here in Beijing, a recent COVID test is necessary to enter public areas. I've gotten used to regularly waiting 30 minutes or an hour just to get my test. Our lives are also dictated by health codes on our phones that track our movements. If our code is green, we can enter public areas. If they turn red, we have to isolate at home or go to quarantine. Zero COVID is not going away anytime soon in China, and neither will the disruptions to people's daily lives. Selena Wang, CNN, Beijing.
Well, a game of geopolitical chess is being played right now in the South Pacific, and China just came up short in the latest round. CNN's Ivan Watson has the details of what's worked and what has not for Beijing.
To many outsiders, island nations in the South Pacific are a tropical paradise, exotic and remote. And yet the focus of intense diplomatic activity from China, part of a Chinese push for influence that's turning the blue Pacific continent into a zone of geopolitical competition between China and its Western rivals. China's foreign minister has been leading a delegation on a whirlwind 10-day tour across the South Pacific, meeting face-to-face or virtually with officials from at least 11 different Pacific Island nations. Most of these countries' entire populations are dwarfed by even a small Chinese city.
Don't be too anxious, don't be too nervous, because the common development of the prosperity of China and all other developing countries would only mean greater harmony, greater justice, and greater prosperity of the whole world.
The last time great powers competed in the South Pacific was World War II, when the U.S. and its allies fought a grinding, island-hopping military campaign against Japan. Since the war, many Pacific islands still have close ties to the U.S. and its Western allies. But in March, that status quo shaken with the leak of a secret security agreement between China and the Solomon Islands signed the following month. It allows the Solomons government to call for help from Chinese police and armed forces. In May, the release of another proposed document.
Let me get you to Washington, where the U.S. president is about to speak.
About our economy and what we're doing to lower the cost for American families. I know that even with today's good news, a lot of Americans remain anxious, and I understand the feeling. I grew up in a family about 100 miles from here where the price of gas went up, you felt it. It was a discussion at the kitchen table. And there's no denying that high prices, particularly around gasoline and food, are a real problem for people. But there's every reason for the American people to feel confident that we'll meet these challenges. Because of the enormous progress we've made on the economy, the Americans can tackle inflation from a position of strength. Still a problem. We can tackle it from a position of strength. The purpose that we've set out to accomplish and the progress we've made, I think, is critical. At the time I took office, about 16 months ago, the economy had stalled and COVID was out of control. Today, thanks to the economic plan and the vaccination plan that my administration put in action, America has achieved the most robust recovery in modern history, just 2 years removed from the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. The job market is the strongest it's been since just after World War II. We've got more evidence of that today. We learned that in May the economy 1,000 new jobs, bringing the total since I took office to 8.7 million new jobs, an all-time record. We learned that more Americans entered the labor force in May. In fact, working-age people have come back into the workforce at a faster rate in this recovery than at any point in the last 40 years. That means that the unemployment rate is near historic lows, and the number of Americans on unemployment benefits has gone from record highs to record lows, with millions of Americans moving up to better jobs with better pay. And American manufacturing is booming. 600,000 new manufacturing jobs created since I took office. But it isn't only about jobs. Since I took office, families are carrying less debt. Their average savings are up. A recent survey from the Federal Reserve found that more Americans feel financially comfortable than any time since the survey began in 2013. That confidence and comfortability is part of the reason why Americans applied to start more new small businesses last year than ever before in American history. And because of our historically strong growth, we have strengthened Medicare and Social Security programs that millions of American families rely on. Yesterday, I learned that Social Security and Medicare trust funds will be able to pay benefits for longer than previously projected before we pass the American Rescue Plan. The reason? A faster than expected recovery in jobs, earnings, economic growth. It's all strengthened the financial prospects for these bedrock programs. In fact, America is in a stronger economic position today than just about any other country in the world. Independent experts have projected that the U.S. economy could grow faster than China's economy this year. That hasn't happened since 1976, nearly one half century ago. The point is this: we've laid an economic foundation that's historically strong, and now we're moving forward to a new moment where we can build on that foundation, build a future of stable, steady growth, so we can bring down inflation without sacrificing all the historic gains we've made. And that's what we're beginning to see in today's jobs report. With today's numbers, the jobs over the last 3 months have averaged about 400,000 jobs per month. That's historically robust, and a sign we're beginning to shift to steady growth after rapidly recovering 600,000 jobs per month over the prior 6 months. And as we move to a new period of stable, steady growth, we should expect to see more moderation. We aren't likely to see the kind of blockbuster job reports month after month like we had over this past year. But that's a good thing. That's a sign of a healthy economy with steady growth, rising wages for working families, everyday costs easing up, and shrinking the deficit. That stability puts us in a strong position to tackle what is clearly a problem, inflation. I've been very clear that fighting inflation is my top economic priority. On Tuesday, I spoke about one element of my inflation plan, giving the Federal Reserve the space they need to operate. Today, I'd like to address the two additional elements of my plan to tackle inflation. One, bringing down the cost of everyday goods for families. And two, bringing down the federal deficit at the same time. Bringing down the cost, here's where we stand. The two challenges on the minds of most working families are prices at the pump and prices at the grocery store. Both of these challenges have been directly exacerbated by Putin's war in Ukraine. The price of gas is up $1.40 since the beginning of the year, when Putin began amassing troops at the Ukrainian border. This is a Putin price hike. Putin's war has raised the price of food because Ukraine and Russia are two of the world's major breadbaskets for wheat and corn, the basic product for so many foods around the world. Ukraine has 20 million tons of grain in storage right now, and it's been in storage since the last harvest. Normally, that would have already been exported into the world market. But because of Putin's invasion and blockade of the port on which they could take that grain out for the rest of the world, it's not. It's not. And look, I understand that families who are struggling probably don't care why the prices are up. They just want them to go down. Joe, what are you going to do to bring them down? But it's important that we understand the root of the problem so we can take steps to solve it. I've been up front with the American people from the outset that there would be a cost here at home of Putin's decision to brutally and savagely invade a sovereign nation. But as your president, I remain committed to doing everything in my power to blunt the impact on American families. That's exactly what I'm doing. I led the world to coordinate the largest release of global oil reserves in history, 240 million barrels, to boost global supply and keep prices from rising even more. I directed the sale of gasoline using homegrown biofuels this summer, and I'm working closely with our European partners to get more of the grain locked in Ukraine right now out into the world market, which could help bring down prices. There's ways to do that over land, which we could talk about at another time. But actions have already helped to blunt that what would have been an even larger Putin price hike. As I said, I'm going to continue to use every tool available to me to further blunt those price hikes as we move forward. But the fact is this, there's more than one way to solve this problem. If food and gas prices are going to be elevated by Putin's price hike, one way we can make things a little better for families is by helping them save on other basic items their family needs on a monthly basis, like their utility bills, their internet bills, their prescription drug bills, and other costs like housing. My goal is to make sure that at the end of the month, families have a little more breathing room than they have now. For example, here's something we can do right now. Congress could help ease the cost for families right away by passing my clean energy investment proposal that I proposed. It's been sitting there. Things like tax credits for businesses to produce clean energy, the tax cuts for families to make their homes more energy efficient. That's what it results in. I met with nearly a dozen CEOs of America's largest utility companies, such as Southern Company and American Electric Power. They told me that if we pass the investments, they'll immediately lower the average family's energy cost by about $500 a year. That would help a lot. That'd make up for a lot. In the long run, it would help families make America truly energy independent. So in the future, American families are no longer subject to the whims of a dictator, half a world away controlling oil. It's not just utility bills, though. Lower prescription drug cost by giving Medicare the power to negotiate with the pharmaceutical companies and how much they can charge, just like they do with the Veterans Administration. Right now, more than X amount of dollars for your insulin. Well, they can decide not to sell it at all, or they can sell it at the price that the government says they'll pay for it. Bringing down the average cost of prescription drugs by capping that cost of insulin, by the way, at no more than $35 a month. It costs them less than $10 to make it. And in some families, it means hundreds of dollars a month, and sometimes hundreds of dollars a year, depending on what ailment they're trying to deal with. Someone with diabetes, for example, it's hundreds of dollars per year. Someone with arthritis, it could be thousands of dollars per year. I've laid out a plan to lower rent and mortgage costs, the largest cost most families face, around a third of a typical family's budget, because we have a shortage of housing. Building more than 1 million more housing units and closing the shortfall in affordable housing in this country will do that. I've laid out a plan to lower the cost of high-speed internet by working with the 20 leading internet service providers to cut their prices and raise their speeds for tens of millions of households. This could lower what they have to pay for high-speed internet by $50 a month or more. And nearly 40% of households in America qualify for these savings. And by the way, you can find out if you'd be eligible by visiting getinternet.gov. Getinternet.gov. Say it again, getinternet.gov. See if you qualify. I've laid out a plan to lower the cost of everyday goods that move through our supply chains to stores and families' doorsteps. For example, at the State of the Union, I called on Congress to crack down on foreign-owned shipping companies that have raised their prices to transport goods by as much as 1,000%. 1,000%. And that obviously raises the cost of the goods on those ships to consumers. The Senate has passed legislation, and I'm hopeful the House can do the same to send me legislation in the coming weeks to crack down on these companies and help lower overall cost. And my plan does all this without raising a penny in taxes on people making less than $400,000 a year, and without raising the deficit at all by taxing the super wealthy and big corporations, like the 55 major corporations that don't pay a single penny in taxes, even though they had $40 billion in profits. The point is this. I'm doing everything I can on my own to help working families during this stretch of higher prices. I'm going to continue to do that. But Congress needs to act as well. We can do so much more if we come together to lower the cost for American families. But my congressional Republican friends, led by Rick Scott, have a different approach. He's actually introduced a plan. He wants to raise taxes on working families by an average of $1,500 a year, put Medicare and Social Security, Social Security and Medicaid on the chopping block every 5 years. In other words, every 5 years, the They're going to no longer exist unless they vote them back into existence. I disagree with that. What in God's name are they doing? I'm going to work with anyone, Democrat, Republican, Independent, to deliver real solutions and real savings for the American people, not take money out of their pockets. Now, the other element I'd like to address that has impacts on inflation is to lower the deficit. The reason this matters to families is because reducing the deficit is another way to ease inflation. My friends on the Republican side like to paint me as the big spender. But let's look at the facts. Facts matter. Under my predecessor, the deficit exploded, rising every single year he was in office. Under my plan, we're on track to cut the federal deficit this year by $1.7 trillion. Hear me now? This year by $1.7 trillion. That's a fact. The largest decline in American history. And by the way, those aren't White House projections. They come from the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office that you and the press and everybody around the country legitimately quotes all the time. That progress on tackling the deficit was not preordained. It was my economic strategy, built into our historic recovery, that we didn't anticipate a war in Ukraine at the time. Historic economic growth that not only helped tens of millions of families move up, it has helped our federal deficit come down. And now because of that strategy, we're on track for a deficit to take up a lower share of our economy than it did before the pandemic. In fact, the Treasury Department is planning to pay down the national debt this quarter, which never happened under my predecessor. Not once. Not once. Because unlike my predecessor, the deficit has come down both years I've been here. I propose a plan to keep shrinking that deficit by making common sense reforms to our tax code, leveling the playing field internationally so that the biggest companies no longer have an incentive to shift them overseas to make their product because they get charged less in taxes and avoid paying their fair share of taxes here at home. We put together a multi-nation initiative that I'm hopeful will come into play at the G7. And ending the outrageous unfairness of our tax system allows billionaires. Look, if you can make $1 billion, I'm all for it. Just pay a little bit of your fair share, you know? Just pay your fair share. Billionaires pay a lower rate than a teacher or a firefighter. The bottom line is this. Part of the reason I ran for president is because I was tired of trickle-down economics. It doesn't work. My plans are to produce the strongest, fastest, most widespread economic recovery America has ever experienced, with record jobs, new record small businesses, and wages rising. It's the foundation for an economy that works for working families. Because of that foundation, we're better positioned than any country in the world to overcome global inflation that we're seeing and reach a new chapter of stable and steady growth. So let's come together and focus on what matters. Let's build on the extraordinary progress we've made. Let's continue to build this economy from the bottom up and the middle out. When that happens, everybody does well, including the very wealthy. Thank you, and God bless you, and may God protect our troops. I'll take a few questions.
Are you going to Saudi Arabia, Mr. President? Are you going to Saudi Arabia?
Elon Musk has said that he has a super bad feeling about the U.S. economy. He's laying off 10%. What do you say to Elon Musk about his feeling about the economy? Jamie Dimon has said similar things.
Well, let me tell you, while Elon Musk is talking about that, Ford is increasing their investment overwhelmingly. I think Ford is increasing the investment in building new electric vehicles, 6,000 new employees, union employees, I might add, in the Midwest. The former Chrysler Corporation, Stellantis, they are also making similar investments in electric vehicles. Intel is adding 20,000 new jobs for making computer chips. You know, lots of luck on his trip to the moon. I mean, you know.
Mr. President, are you going to go to Saudi Arabia, Mr. President?
I'm not sure whether I'm going. I have no direct plans at the moment, but let me tell you that I have been engaged in trying to work with how we can bring more stability and peace in the Middle East. And there is a possibility that I would be going to meet with both the Israelis and some Arab countries at the time, including, I expect, would be Saudi Arabia, would be included in that if I did go. But I have no direct plans at the moment.
Is the kingdom still a pariah in your eyes?
Look, I'm not going to change my view on human rights, but as President of the United States, my job is to bring peace if I can. Peace if I can. And that's what I'm going to try to do.
Mr. President, would you be open to meeting with the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman if you do end up going to Saudi Arabia?
Look, we're getting way ahead of ourselves here. What I want to do is see to it that we diminish the likelihood that there's a continuation of some of the senseless wars between Israel and the Arab nations. And that's what I'm focused on.
Is OPEC doing enough on oil production?
Well, what I recently read in talking to my team, that they acknowledge that there is an oil shortage, and they have made an announcement of late that they're going to increase production. So I don't know enough to know whether it's enough, but I know it's positive.
Mr. President, does Ukraine have to cede territory to achieve some peace?
You know, and you've been always fair with me. From the beginning, I've said, and not everyone's agreed with me, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. It's their territory. I'm not going to tell them what they should and shouldn't do. But it appears to me that at some point along the line, there's a settlement here. And what that entails, I don't know. I don't think anybody knows at the time. But in the meantime, we're going to continue to put the Ukrainians in a position where they can defend themselves. Thank you all so very much.
Will you go to the Hill next week on guns to meet with lawmakers?
My staff is.
Well, Joe Biden speaking about the U.S. economy on the back of what are robust new jobs numbers. The president said America is in a stronger economic position today than any other country in the world. In fact, he said some experts suggest the U.S. economic growth could outstrip China's growth this year. And that would be the first time since 1976. Fighting inflation, he said, is his top economic priority. He said he's focused on bringing down the cost of everyday goods, fuel and food. He blamed the spike in costs on Putin and Putin's war. He said, as president, he'll do everything in his power to blunt the cost on American families. I am doing everything I can on my own, but he said Congress must help, appealing to lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, reminding his domestic audience that he has their backs. It's the lawmakers who aren't doing their bit. He also promised to bring down the cost of the federal deficit, reducing the deficit by $1.7 trillion this year. Part of the reason, he said, is that he is tired of trickle-down economics. Part of the reason he decided he wanted to run for president is that he's tired of trickle-down economics. He said it just doesn't work. Let's bring in CNN's business correspondent Rahel Solomon. I have to say as well, he did and was challenged by reporters on a number of issues, Ukraine, OPEC, Saudi. He was also challenged on the fact that Jamie Dimon has said that the US economy faces the threat of a hurricane. Elon Musk is worried about what is down the road. What's your assessment of what we just heard?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think when he was questioned about Elon Musk's comments yesterday in a report, according to Reuters, that he was worried about a super bad economy, he sort of brushed it off, right? He started to talk about what Ford is doing, and he sort of threw up his hands and said, you know, I don't really know. He has clearly said that this was a good news jobs report. He said that Americans remain anxious, and he knows that, but he said that Americans should be confident that his administration is on top of it. A few asterisks, however. He pointed to a recent Fed report that said that Americans are feeling very positive about their economic conditions. A bit of clarification there. That was a recent Fed report, but Becky, on page 1 of that report, it clearly states that the findings report primarily financial circumstances in late October and early November of 2021. That, of course, was before the war. That was, of course, before the most recent spike in gas prices that we have seen. That was before the Omicron variant. So a bit of perspective there. I should also point to some recent CNN polling that suggests that a majority of U.S. adults actually believe that President Biden's policies have hurt the economy. In terms of today's jobs report, look, I think as one analyst said, it was a Goldilocks report. There was a bit of good news in there. There was a bit of bad news in there, depending on your perspective. Clearly, President Biden trying to get ahead of the messaging and say, at least from his perspective and the White House's perspective, it was good news.
Rahel, thank you for that. So we've just been listening to the US president, mostly speaking about the US economy, telling the viewers of his audience, that is a domestic audience, obviously, but incredibly important to the rest of the world, what he is doing in his fight against inflation. He is talking about fuel and food being the costs of Putin's war, blaming President Putin for the spike in the cost of everyday goods, and saying that he will do everything he can to blunt the effect of those costs. He was also challenged, thank you, Rahel, he was also challenged by reporters after he spoke about the economy, about a number of other issues, not least an upcoming trip to the Gulf, where he is likely to, it looks as if he is planning to, meet with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman. I've got Fawaz Sherjas, a Middle East expert, regular guest on this show. He is Professor of International Relations at the London School of Economics. Delighted that you are with us here today. You and I have been talking to our sources now. I certainly have, and I know you will have been for some time. This actually doesn't come as a shock to me that Joe Biden, or certainly the White House, has announced that there is a trip in the offing. But it's certainly a pivot by this Biden administration, isn't it?
Well, Becky, it's simply the US president has blinked first. Joe Biden has blinked first. The Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and Joe Biden face each other. I mean, and finally, Joe Biden has eaten his words, what he has said about the Crown Prince. Remember, what did he say? He said he wants to isolate Saudi Arabia. He wants it to be the pariah state that it is. He would not basically shake the hands of the Crown Prince. The White House has been begging the Saudis to increase their oil input for the past year, to no avail. And finally, the president is going personally, and he will most likely not only shake the hands of the Crown Prince, but also make a plea that the Saudis increase their oil export. Why? American domestic politics. He made it very clear. He wants to blunt the impact of the inflation, both food and energy, on the American public. And the reason we need to tell our audience, because midterm congressional elections in November, and Americans, we know, Americans vote their pocketbooks. And that's really what American domestic politics, not the Ukraine.
It was the reason why I brought up what he was talking about on inflation ahead of our conversation with Rahel, because it's exactly that. The speech that he just made was a speech to his domestic audience saying, I've got your backs. I'm going to sort out this spike in food and fuel. It's been caused by the war in Ukraine. It's Putin's fault, and I don't want it to hurt you, Mr. and Mrs. America. But what he's got to do, and what you rightly suggest he is now going to do, is swallow his pride, as it were, and go, hand in fist to Riyadh, because that is where there is a lever to blunt the cost of high fuel at the pump, effectively. Question is, though, the problem is the Saudis do lead this OPEC Plus group, but ultimately it was a gesture they made in the last sort of 24, 48 hours. There's not an awful lot of wiggle room in that oil market, actually.
Not really. The big question, Becky, is not that the president is swallowing his pride. The big question is that the American president, who has made human rights and morality top priority, realpolitik, takes precedence over human rights. Point one. Point two. The Saudis have not been forthcoming, will most likely not to be as forthcoming as the American president wants them to be. I mean, they increased price by the export of oil in July and August by 400,000 barrels, hardly touched the surface. So my take on it is that the Saudis will not rupture their economic relations with Russia. They do not trust the Americans. In fact, a rupture has taken place in American-Saudi relations. My take on it is that the Saudis will play both sides. They'll play the Americans against the Russians and against the Chinese. What we are seeing here, Becky, the big point here, you always say, what's the big point? The big point is that pivotal regional powers, Saudi Arabia, Iran, United Arab Emirates, Turkey now, hedge their bets. They try to minimize the risk because of the great power competitions. The United States against Russia, the United States against China, they have options.
Where does this leave them at this point?
A great position. I mean, whoever believed, think of the United Arab Emirates, very small country, tremendous power, bargaining power. I mean, the Crown Prince, even though the Biden administration has done everything in its power to try to really dismiss him as and accusing the Crown Prince of committing a crime, the killing Jamal Khashoggi. They have options now. Always the great power system, the competition between the great powers allows regional powers to exploit, to have opportunities. And that's exactly what the Saudis are doing
So
now.
I just wonder how the Gulf states, particularly the UAE and Saudi, and you add in there Iran and Turkey and the wider story here, potentially, because the Iranians could benefit from this from this need of the Biden administration to get a number of things in position at present. What do they do with that power at this point?
I mean, I think the question is, what do the Saudis want? The Saudis want advanced weapons from the United States. They're already providing now. The Biden administration behind the scenes has really basically been providing major advanced weapons to Saudi Arabia. The Saudis want even their own nuclear program, peaceful program. The Biden administration has also promised that. And thirdly, of course, in terms of security, they want Patriot missiles in order to really protect Saudi Arabia from attacks from Yemen and Iran. That they want basically the administration not to be very forthcoming towards the nuclear talks with Iran. And what do the American wants? Oil, oil, and oil. Because they want to domestic politics. I mean, to President Biden, the congressional elections in November is existential. In particular, Becky, if the Republicans manage to capture both houses, it means the end of the Democratic majority, the end of the Biden administration as an effective presidency for the next 2 years.
It's fascinating. I do want our viewers just to hear what Joe Biden did say when questioned on oil and this upcoming pending trip to Saudi Arabia. Just have a listen to this.
Well, what I recently read is talking to my team that they acknowledge that there is an oil shortage, and they have made an announcement of late that they're going to increase production. So I don't know enough to know whether it's enough, but I know it's positive.
That was Joe Biden in response to a reporter's question about what the Saudis had done and what I think you can be only described as a gesture to the oil markets. It's always a pleasure having you with us. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Farah Zhezhez in the House, always making an awful lot of sense. We are taking a very short break. Back after this. Right, you're watching Connect the World. I'm Becky Anderson. To Russia's war on Ukraine now. Grim milestone is a phrase that's often overused, isn't it? But how else would you describe this? Well, the war Russia thought it would swiftly win in Ukraine is now in its 100th day, 100 days in with seemingly no end in sight. Smoke from incessant shelling rising over Severodonetsk. The city is the last major holdout in what is the Luhansk region. The UK predicts the entire region will fall to Moscow within a couple of weeks. However, Ukraine says it repelled several attacks in the past day and Russian forces have made little headway. The president insists Ukraine will not give up.
The leaders of parliamentary factions are here. The president's chief of staff is here. Prime Minister of Ukraine, Shmyhal, is here. Podolyak is here. The president is here. Our team is much bigger. The armed forces of Ukraine are here. Most importantly, our people, the people of our country, are here. We have been defending Ukraine for 100 days. Victory shall be ours. Glory to Ukraine.
Well, the Kremlin today also vowed to continue its, quote, special operation, as it calls it, until its goals are achieved. So both sides digging in as we get to the 100-day mark. CNN's Ben Wiedemann has been reporting throughout Ukraine and seen the fighting and the massive destruction firsthand. He joins us now from Kyiv 100 days in. I wonder if you can give us your assessment of where we are at.
Well, this is a war that many people, including Western intelligence, thought would be over in a matter of weeks. Here we are 100 days in. Life in Kyiv on the surface appears to be quite normal. Ukraine isn't victorious yet, but certainly what's clear is that Russia has already suffered a symbolic defeat in the fact that it was only, more than just a month ago that the Russian forces were on the outskirts of this city. They are gone, well gone, but they are focusing their efforts on Severodonetsk and the Donbas region, where they are using their massive artillery power to try to grind the Ukrainian resistance into dust. But the Ukrainians are still holding on. The price, of course, has been massive. You are talking about perhaps tens of thousands of civilians having been killed. 35% of Ukraine's GDP has been wiped out at a loss of about $600 billion. Massive destruction to the infrastructure, but Ukraine still is holding on and seems to be, in some areas, for instance, in the south around the town of Kherson, regaining lost ground. So at this point, after 100 days, where this conflict is going, it's not clear. The West continues to provide a certain level of military support to Ukrainian forces, but Ukrainian officials stress time and time again they need more and they need that support to arrive more quickly. But it certainly appears that the wildly ambitious goals of Vladimir Putin in taking over the capital, the country within weeks, are the thing of dreams. Becky?
How big a risk is the possibility that the world gets fatigued, those who have been supporting Ukraine in this effort to repel the Russians get fatigued, as a piece that we've written today on CNN.com suggests? You know, Putin likely hoping that there will be a sense of indifference going forward. What's the risk there, Ben?
Well, I think there's no question the Russians are banking on that. The Russians, after all, if you look at what happened in World War II, they held on and were able to emerge victorious because of the depth of their territory, because of their willingness to take casualties that most countries would never be able to fathom. And so, for instance, we just saw President Biden talking about the impact of fuel prices, which worldwide have gone up by somewhere between 20-25%. And there's going to be domestic resistance in the United States, which is a bit of a political mess as it is anyway, where people are going to blame the American president for things out of his control, like the increase in fuel prices. So there is a real danger that as the economic price of this war begins to really bite in Europe and the United States, that the amount of public support will start to diminish. And then there's sort of beyond that, the global impact of potential severe shortages of grain. For instance, Africa imports 44% of its grain from Russia and the Ukraine. If you start seeing severe food shortages, famines, God forbid, in Africa, then perhaps the support for Ukraine in this war could begin to dry up.
Ben Wiedemann's back in Kyiv in Ukraine. Always good to have you there and reporting your analysis and your insight is really important for our viewers. Thank you, Ben. And you can read more about 100 days of Russia's war on Ukraine on the website. CNN's Nathan Hodge, as I said, our former Moscow bureau chief, has a story about what has become a slog on the ground, why he says Russian President Vladimir Putin may now be playing the long game, counting on international fatigue to set in. That's at CNN.com on your computer or your CNN app on your smartphone. Well, just ahead, saying thank you.
Welcome to One World. I'm Eleni Jarkas. It's been 100 days since Russia invaded Ukraine, and Ukraine's president is sounding resolute. Here's what's coming up.
We have been defending Ukraine for 100 days. Victory shall be ours.
Why Ukraine is claiming some success in the south as it stalls Russia in the east. Plus, the chairman of the African Union meets with Vladimir Putin in an attempt to solve the food crisis as Ukrainian ports are blockaded. And later, this X-Wing fighter looks straight out of Star Wars, but it's being used to fight a different empire. Hear how it's raising hope for Ukraine. Hello, I'm Eleni Jarkas, live in Dubai, and this is One World. Russia's war on Ukraine has been grinding on for 100 agonizing days. In that time, Ukraine's president says Moscow has taken control of 20% of his country. Still, Volodymyr Zelensky is projecting resilience and pledging to win the fight.
The leaders of parliamentary factions are here. The president's chief of staff is here. Prime Minister of Ukraine, Shmyhal, is here. Podolyak is here. The president is here. Our team is much bigger. The armed forces of Ukraine are here. Most importantly, our people, the people of our country, are here. We have been defending Ukraine for 100 days. Victory shall be ours. Glory to Ukraine.
Ukraine says it is conducting systematic counterattacks against its occupiers in the south and that it has thwarted Russia's attempts to recover lost ground. In the east, the Ukrainian military also says it has pushed back multiple Russian assaults, with President Zelensky claiming some success in Severodonetsk. The city is Russia's main target in the Luhansk region, and even though Ukraine is desperately fighting for it, an intelligence report from the UK says Moscow could control the whole area within 2 weeks. CNN's Ben Wiedemann joins us now live from Kyiv. Ben, look, it's 100 days into this war. Could you give me a sense of the dynamic on the battlefield at this point in time, where we're still hearing about fierce fighting in the east?
All the focus, Eleni, right now is on Severodonetsk, that city, the easternmost city under Ukrainian control, or most of it at least. We're hearing as much as 70 to 80% of that city is now under Russian control, but Ukrainian forces continue to hold out in pockets. Now, there's one large chemical complex in that city where I've spent a good deal of time back in April. where we understand that as many as 800 civilians are still hiding out in the bomb shelters underneath. We actually did go into those bomb shelters in April, and the situation back then was desperate. So you can only imagine how it is now. Now, the worry, of course, is that if Severodonetsk falls, this could really be a major achievement for Russian forces, they do seem to be aiming at taking over all of Luhansk as well as the Donetsk region as well. This has been made clear by Russian officials who have clearly scaled down their ambitions at the moment, but this is the area of major emphasis. Now, the Russians in that area have an advantage of their very short supply lines from their positions, and also they are using to maximum advantage their heavy artillery, which they have a large amount of. Not very sophisticated, but they're using it to maximum effect. And we're seeing the results play out here. Now, we heard British intelligence is estimating that Luhansk might fall in its entirety within the last 2 weeks. But let's not forget Western intelligence agencies were predicting the decline and fall of Ukraine as well back in February, and that didn't happen either. Eleni?
Yeah, I mean, really interesting hearing on that report. The reality is that President Zelensky has been incrementally changing the messaging, specifically around Severodonetsk. He was saying 70% Russian controlled, then he said 80% Russian controlled. Now we're talking about what the counteroffensive would look like. And it seems that one of the most important elements that are going to help the Ukrainians is getting powerful rockets into their hands.
Yes, that's what the Ukrainians have been urging the West now for weeks, is to provide artillery with a longer range than what they have at the moment. They're looking for precision artillery as well, and it's clearly not arriving as quickly as they need it, because that's the only way they can counterbalance the Russian advantage in terms of sheer number of artillery pieces. But if they don't get there soon enough, then it may be too late. But we did hear President Biden several days ago announce that there would be a $700 million package, another one for the Ukraine, which would include these missiles, or rather these artillery systems, with the condition, of course, that they not be used to attack targets within Russia itself. The U.S. administration has made it clear now. At this point, they're not writing off providing weapon systems, but they're putting conditions on how those weapon systems will be used. But they need to get to Ukraine as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
Eleni?
Exactly, and as they're discussing it over, the last few days, every second counts on the ground. Ben Wiedemann, always good to see you. Thank you. Turning to the US now, a country that's reckoning with gun safety issues following a recent string of horrific, deadly mass shootings. But the idea of stricter gun laws is fiercely polarizing for the only nation in the world where there are more firearms than people. In a primetime speech last night, US President Joe Biden pressed Republican lawmakers to finally act. CNN's Jeremy Diamond has more.
After a spate of mass shootings,
how much more carnage are we willing to accept? How many more innocent American lives must be taken before we say enough?
President Biden making his most fervent and specific appeal yet for stricter gun laws.
We need to ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. And if we can't ban assault weapons, then we should raise the age to purchase them from 18 to 21. Strengthen background checks. Enact safe storage law and red flag laws. Repeal the immunity that protects gun manufacturers from liability. Address the mental health crisis.
The president demanding action during a rare primetime address as a somber line of 56 candles burned behind him, representing victims of gun violence from every U.S. state and territory. Biden's speech comes after he and the First Lady visited the grieving communities of Uvalde, Texas and Buffalo, New York. He implored the country and Congress to act now.
After Columbine, after Sandy Hook, after Charleston, after Orlando, after Las Vegas, after Parkland, nothing has been done. This time that can't be true.
The president stressing this isn't about harming lawful gun owners.
I respect the culture and the tradition and the concerns of lawful gun owners. At the same time, the Second Amendment, like all other rights, is not absolute.
And arguing guns are the #1 killer of children in this country, according to the CDC.
More than car accidents, more than cancer. Over the last 2 decades, more school-age children have died from guns than on-duty police officers and active-duty military combined.
Biden hasn't ruled out additional executive action, but as a bipartisan group of senators negotiate a potential compromise package, the president's saying it's now up to Congress to act. On Thursday, the House Judiciary Committee met for a 10-hour-long session during a recess week to debate a gun reform package. One measure included Biden's proposal to raise the age to purchase some assault rifles from 18 to 21. The package was passed along a party-line vote.
What's wrong with raising the age for semi-automatic rifles?
Unconstitutional. Even the Ninth Circuit just said it was unconstitutional.
Spare me the bullshit about constitutional rights.
But in the Senate, that proposal faces stiff Republican resistance, a political reality Biden acknowledged.
Don't tell me raising the age won't make a difference. Enough. My God. The fact that the majority of the Senate Republicans don't want any of these proposals even to be debated or come up for a vote, I find unconscionable.
Harsh words there, and that was CNN's Jeremy Diamond reporting for us. Despite fears of a slowing economy, the U.S. jobs report slightly beat expectations. New numbers show employers added 390,000 jobs last month, and the employment rate held steady at 3.6%. President Biden says the numbers show progress, but inflation is still a problem.
And there's no denying that high prices, particularly around gasoline and food, are a real problem for people. But there's every reason for the American people to feel confident that we'll meet these challenges. Because of the enormous progress we've made on the economy, the Americans can tackle inflation from a position of strength. It's still a problem. We can tackle it from a position of strength.
And there's reason to be cautious. Some financial experts predict an economic hurricane is coming due to fears the U.S. central bank could trigger a recession by raising interest rates to fight inflation. And inflation is a key issue for not just the United States, but it's impacting nations around the world, from Turkey to Sri Lanka and even the European Union. CNN business correspondent Rahul Solomon joins us now from New York to add a bit of perspective. Look, the numbers are pretty clear. They beat expectations. We knew we have a very strong jobs market on our hands. The point here is that we're starting to see a lot of people in high positions talking about economic hurricanes. Elon Musk also weighing in, saying he's just not feeling really good about the economy. Do we take what he says with a pinch of salt, given that he's known to inflate markets or make markets come under pressure in his favor, which we've seen happen in the past?
Yeah, I mean, look, Elon Musk certainly has a track record of making sort of bold statements, but I think when you consider we're also hearing from Jamie Dimon, who doesn't necessarily have that same track record, maybe it makes you think twice about when you're listening to Elon Musk. We are hearing sort of a growing chorus of people warning about what may be down the road. Let's start with today's jobs report. We know that always is very important for the Fed as it tries to battle inflation. A lot of people calling it a Goldilocks report, Eleni, adding 390,000 jobs, as you pointed out. That is, however, the lowest we have seen in about a year. So that is a sign of some easing. When we look at where the jobs are, take a look at these industries, 84,000 jobs coming back in leisure and hospitality, professional and business services, 75,000, and transportation and warehousing, very important. This includes truckers. Eleni, we are dealing with a trucker shortage here in the U.S., 47,000 jobs there. So in the press conference, or in those reports we heard from Biden, he described today's report as good news, said that Americans can feel confident that the White House is dealing with inflation from a position of strength, as we heard. But then he was also asked about Elon Musk, and this report from Reuters this morning that Elon Musk The world's richest man put out a note to his employees at Tesla saying that he has a super bad feeling about the economy and he wants to cut about 10% of jobs at Tesla. President Biden was asked about Musk. Take a listen to how he responded.
Well, Elon Musk is talking about that. Ford is increasing their investment overwhelmingly. I think Ford is increasing the investment in building new electric vehicles, 6,000 new employees, union employees, I might add, in the Midwest. The former Chrysler Corporation, Stellantis, they are also making similar investments in electric vehicles. Intel is adding 20,000 new jobs for making computer chips. You know, lots of luck on his trip to the moon.
So, pretty snarky response from the president about Elon Musk. They have had some history in terms of their relationship, Eleni. But back to the economics of it all. The Elon Musk warning coming after Jamie Dimon's warning, and what we're seeing sort of in reports, some concerns of a slowing consumer and some concerns that the Fed just may not get it right. They have to land this perfectly to get it right. And as history suggests, that is going to be very difficult to do. We get the latest CPI, the latest inflationary read here in the U.S. next Friday. Eleni, after today's report, that's going to become even more important.
Yeah, you've got to raise rates just enough to get inflation down and not derail economic growth. But I have to say, I enjoyed it when President Biden took that page out and he was armed with all those jobs numbers from his competitors. Rahel Solomon, good to see you. Thank you so much. Celebrations marking Queen Elizabeth's 70-year reign are going on despite the Queen's absence. She missed Thanksgiving service earlier, and Buckingham Palace says she won't be at Saturday's Epsom Derby after experiencing some discomfort following Thursday's Platinum Jubilee events. Max Foster has more from London.
The bells toll for the Queen as guests arrive at St Paul's Cathedral in London for the Thanksgiving service, including former PMs, the Mayor of London and ministers. Prime Minister Boris Johnson also in attendance, receiving boos from the crowd. But perhaps the most notorious guests were Prince Harry and Meghan, welcomed with cheers in what was their first public appearance as a couple at a royal event in 2 years, since a very public break from royal life. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge make their way to the cathedral next, closely followed by the Duchess of Cornwall and Prince Charles, who was there to represent the Queen in this celebration after the monarch felt discomfort after Thursday's events. As the Queen watched from Windsor Castle, Charles took her seat, one that he's ordained to one day take himself as king. But even in her absence, the Queen's public service, her life, and even her love for horse racing were at the heart of this event.
Your Majesty, we are sorry that you're not here with us this morning, but we are so glad that you are still in the saddle.
A touching service enchanted by the cathedral and royal and military choirs and prayers.
Keep on doing.
And even a reading from the Prime Minister himself. But the ceremony wasn't without its hiccups, including a last-minute change of Archbishop after the Archbishop of Canterbury contracted COVID-19. It was a beautiful and cheerful ceremony, honouring the longest-serving monarch of Great Britain, and in the first royal event in St Paul's Cathedral without the Queen in 70 years.
Right, that was Max Foster reporting. And joining me now is CNN royal historian Kate Williams. Kate, really good to see you. Look, the Queen missed the service today after what seemed to be a heavy load yesterday. And this service was actually so central to these celebrations. How significant was her absence?
Yes, it's a very important service for her, a celebration of her reign, of her service, and of course of her role as head of the Church of England here in the United Kingdom. It means a lot to her. It would have meant a huge amount to her. It was where we were expecting to see her, so I think it's very poignant to her that she can't attend. But really, when we look at what she did yesterday, standing out there on the balcony, it was a long day for her, and she is nearly 100. So I think it doesn't mean anything that she didn't attend, but I think it will be rather sad for her because it was such a great day, particularly, as Max was saying, with all the family coming together.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I was watching the celebrations. It looked tiring just watching from afar. Look, the balcony moment, that was sort of the big moment. The Sussexes weren't on the balcony. It was a sort of change of rules for working royals only. But there was so much excitement. I know the media was sort of looking out for them to get a glimpse. Today we got a bit of a glimpse of when they were walking into the cathedral. Give me a sense about, how important it was to see them back in action after 2 years of not being at an official engagement.
Yes, it was really exciting. I was out there, out at St Paul's, and there was this huge roar when the Sussexes arrived, real popularity. People were really thrilled to see them. And, there was this real closeness, the family was together, and there's been a lot of negative press about Meghan and Harry, and I think it's time to look past that and see that they were there to support the Queen. We understand that yesterday the Queen had a private meeting with Meghan and Harry to meet their little girl Lilibet, who turns 1 tomorrow, and there will be a little birthday party for her in Windsor, and the Queen will also attend that as well. So certainly, as the Queen said in her statement when Meghan and Harry left the royal family, left as full-time royals, she said they're much loved members of our family, and that was very clear today.
Yeah, it's a hard question to ask, but look, we've seen sort of the party go on without her, and then one has to wonder what would life or what would the monarchy look like without her being at the helm? Like, what would the future of the monarchy be?
Well, yes, that's a good question. Is all the excitement, the celebration, the spectacular party we saw yesterday, the huge crowds that we're seeing today, is that for the monarchy or is it for the Queen? This woman who was born in 1926, has seen so much the 20th century, served in World War II, came to the throne in 52. To me, I think a lot of the excitement is for the Queen, her long service, her duty, her devotion, and it's very important to her. She sees her popularity, that it's the same for the next monarchy. So it is also a deliberate really strategy that Charles takes over more and more of her traditional roles, so the British people, so the world, get used to seeing him in the role of king.
All right, Kate, really good to see you. Thank you so much for that analysis.
Thank you so much.
And coming up, the African Union chairman meets with Russian President Putin, how he hopes Russia can help stop a catastrophic food crisis. Humanitarian groups have been sounding the alarm about how Russia's war on Ukraine has triggered a global food crisis. Many countries depend on shipments of grains and fertilizer from the war-torn nation. Some African countries were already facing famine-like conditions before this conflict, and now they're being hit particularly hard. It's partly because Russian officials are blocking vital goods at Ukraine's Black Sea ports. Yet some African leaders who have political and economic ties with Russia have not condemned Russia's invasion. Well, today, the African Union chair and Senegalese President Macky Sall was in Sochi meeting with Mr. Putin about this very issue, and he says he has high hopes the two can cooperate and resolve this crisis. Jude Moore is a senior policy fellow at the Center for Global Development. He joins me now from Washington. Jude, great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us. I have to say, you know, seeing Macky Sall with President Putin, I mean, it gives sort of a big question about whether they can find a way forward and whether Macky Sall has any sway to try and convince Putin to open up those supply chains. What do you think?
Yeah, again, thanks, Eleni, for having me. I think so. I think, you know, African governments have not condemned Russia en masse. In fact, subsequently, some African governments have abstained from UN resolutions. Some of them have voted, like Eritrea has voted against them. So because of that, compared to, say, Europe or the United States, the representative of the African continent at that level, who is now Macky Sall, chair of the AU, has some leverage to see if there can be some negotiated settlement to the crisis in Ukraine, because there's only a diplomatic out. There's no way to actually end this militarily.
Yeah, and it's so interesting that you mentioned that so many African countries have not condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And I guess that brings up the question, is Vladimir Putin really pro-releasing supply and helping African countries? Do you think this is a show of force? Because we have to be honest here. We know Sergei Lavrov has actually mentioned the fact that African countries in the past have been ostracized. They need a bigger voice at the UN table. So it's almost like Russia was going to pull the African card at some point. And do you think that this might be it?
Not only that, very high-ranking Russian official who supposedly has access to Putin has talked about how food crisis in places like Africa would actually, you know, spur some sort of surge in migration and coming to Europe. So on the one hand, it seems as if Russia is advocating that Europe is somehow responsible for this. And so it is not clear if Macky Sall is going to convince him. But again, Africans comprise at maybe a fifth of the global population, and it makes sense that something happening outside Africa that has such significant impact, African leaders would do what is in their power to attempt to sway which powers can be swayed, which individuals can be swayed to be able to do this. So I think it's important that the African leaders are taking this step, and who knows, they might be the ones to be able to push this to where we get some sort of settlement.
Yeah. I want to give the audience a sense of what kind of supply and price shocks Africa could experience. You know, we've been talking so much about gasoline prices increasing in the US and inflation increasing in other parts of the developed world, but it's actually developing economies that are really going to be experiencing excruciating pain.
Yes. So one is, we talk about fuel prices, right? So some countries in Africa, like Nigeria, Gabon, Angola, might benefit from high prices in petroleum products, but most of the continent are net importers. So high fuel prices is going to have significant impact on them. Now, most Africans, especially sub-Saharan African countries, do not really eat a lot of wheat products, but they eat other grains, especially like rice. Now, because of the decline in wheat supplies and the pressure on wheat prices, it is beginning to affect other African staples. And that is the issue. So today, there were news and rumors that India was considering curbing rice exports. Vietnam and Thailand were considering curbing rice exports. Even though the Indians have denied it, this carries significant consequences for the continent because, as you noted in your opening, in the eastern part of the continent, there has been, especially in the Horn of Africa, 4 successive failures of the rains, and it looks as if there's going to be a 5th. So it is on both fuel and food prices that we're seeing the impact happen. So it might not directly be wheat, but it is the impact of wheat, the shortage in wheat on other grains that is having such devastating impact on the availability and food security across the continent.
Yeah. Yeah, you're painting a dire scenario very quickly. There's a lot of talk that you could see the rise of alternate powers coming to the fore and that Africa has a very unique opportunity. African countries have unique opportunity to pick sides. Do you believe that?
I see that. I think African leaders have been really clear about this. It is not in Africa's interest. The gaps, the scale of the challenges the continent faces, that scale cannot be met by any single partner. And so African governments are going to do everything in their power to retain a diversity of partners. I think that is what undergirds their, sort of hesitation to completely come out and condemn the Russians. I think they're going to try to keep their relationships with Europe, the United States, Russia, and China. Unless it actually is completely unavoidable, African countries are going to try not to choose or pick any one side.
Yeah. Julia, thank you very much. Really good to have you on the show. Much appreciated.
Pleasure.
Now, coming up, imagine waiting hours to get proof that you're well enough to go to the mall or take the bus. Why that's becoming the norm in some parts of China. That's coming up after the break. Hello and welcome back to One World. Let's catch up on the headlines. Turkey is renaming itself as Turkiye. The UN agreed to recognize the new name on Wednesday after a request from the country. Most Turks already call their country Turkiye, but other countries had other names for it. Eswatini, the Netherlands, and Cote d'Ivoire also had recent name changes. Now, Saturday marks 33 years since the Tiananmen Square massacre in Beijing. Activists in Hong Kong traditionally gather on June 4th to remember those killed, but police are warning against any public commemorations again this year, citing COVID concerns. Authorities say anyone breaking the ban could face prison time. Now, the Chinese government's zero-COVID policy continues to wreak havoc on the lives of many Chinese residents in the form of lockdowns and long lines. Shanghai residents are queuing up for hours to get a negative PCR result required before using public transportation or entering a public area. CNN's Selena Wang brings us more details from Beijing.
Freedom was short-lived for many in Shanghai. Just a day after the city started exiting a brutal 2-month lockdown, multiple neighborhoods were placed back under lockdown for 14 days. Starting on June 1st, Shanghai began allowing most of its 25 million residents to leave their communities. But nearly 2 million were still confined to their homes because they had recent COVID cases in their areas. Now, the policy across China is that every positive COVID case and close contact must go to quarantine facilities. The community where the cases are found also then go into lockdown. So as a result of just 7 new COVID cases in Shanghai, more than 100 people were sent to government quarantine and 4 neighborhoods were sealed off. People in Shanghai still remain on edge, haunted by fears of a renewed lockdown. On Thursday morning, crowds were seen fleeing from a mall because people feared a COVID case was found and the mall was going to lock down. The mall later said it temporarily closed to disinfect without confirming whether there was a COVID case there. In cities across China, including Shanghai and here in Beijing, a recent COVID test is necessary to enter public areas. I've gotten used to regularly waiting 30 minutes or an hour just to get my test. Our lives are also dictated by health codes on our phones that track our movements. If our code is green, we can enter public areas. If they turn red, we have to isolate at home or go to quarantine. Zero COVID is not going away anytime soon in China, and neither will the disruptions to people's daily lives. Selena Wang, CNN, Beijing.
A physician in Atlanta is trying to raise money for Ukraine with the help of a unique piece of Star Wars memorabilia. Akaki Lekiachvili has built a replica of the X-Wing starfighter, complete with moving wings and flashing lights. Initially, he built it to teach kids about science and technology, but now he's using the homemade aircraft as a public attraction, collecting donations from fans and using the funds to support Ukrainians. Akaki, who grew up in the country of Georgia in the Soviet era, says he views Ukraine as the Star Wars rebel alliance and the war against Russia as the fight against the empire. Time now for the exchange and a conversation with the X-Wing builder himself. Akaki Lekiachvili joins me now from Poland. Great to see you, Akaki. I have so many questions for you, but look, you grew up in Soviet-controlled Georgia and you watched Star Wars later in life. So I guess at what point did you see the X-Wing and say, you know what, I want to build this?
It was a combination of factors. I always wanted to be an aerospace engineer. Ended up in field of medicine, but remained a tinkerer. My son loves math, science, space exploration, and as I jokingly say, his superpower is that he never runs out of questions, always keeping me on my heels. We love learning things together and building things together. And then also in the northeast Atlanta, we have this wonderful community of families that are very talented, very supportive, and creative, fun-loving, and they are also enablers of the silly ideas such as building X-Wing in your house. So when I proposed building an X-Wing to support STEM program, science, technology, engineering, and math, there was no lack of support, and that's how it started.
It looks pretty awesome. I'm looking at visuals of this now. You didn't have any plans. You didn't have any sort of, physical idea of what this should, I guess, look like. You were looking at visual representations. Take me through the process and how long this took you.
It took longer than I initially expected. It took about 6 years. And you are absolutely correct. There are no plans. we used screenshots from the movies primarily to better understand the dimensions, and sometimes we used a projector to project the screenshots on the wall and figure out what was the silhouettes, etc. In addition, as part of this building X-Wing, I started an informal extracurricular program called Tinkermeisters, where we would bring elementary school and middle school students to provide workshops related to STEM-related topics, and they were helping a lot as well. It started in my basement before we realized that it was too big for the basement and moved to my garage. And at the end, I ended up building a 30 by 30 hangar in my backyard to finish this project.
Okay, so now I have to say, because you've said that Ukraine is the Star Wars Rebel Alliance and the war against Russia as the fight against the empire. Tell me how you're using this incredible piece of engineering to help raise money for Ukraine.
So we started very informally. We would roll this out at the shopping centers, and people would show up, kids would sit inside, play with buttons and electronics, and they were very generous donating money. We had several fundraising events so far, working closely with the Ukrainian Congress Committee of America, Georgia branch, and now we are planning something bigger, more epic. We started a fundraiser on GoFundMe. If you search under X-Wing, it should come up. And we are hoping that if we raise $1 million, we can donate this X-Wing to City of Atlanta. We are also in conversations with them. And in general, this endeavor had lots of benefits that I did not expect, as our neighbors, friends, colleagues found out that we were coming to Poland. Many people, without any solicitation, donated money that we brought here in Poland, and today I had the honor to go to the regional refugee support center, and we donated a truck full